In the beginning, a low, resonant voice echoed, mingling with the sounds of shattering fragments that pieced together a disjointed image. I knew that name very well, uncontrollably so. A master swordsman trapped in a room. A man driven mad, the useless firstborn son of Count Perdiem, Gisline Perdiem. Facing him was a bloodied man struggling to rise, his eyes filled with disbelief and resentment. He, the best knight of the North, was defeated by such a piece of trash? The cloaked figure opposite him spoke mockingly. Quite cozy, isn't it? I spent a fortune setting up that trap. The speaker was clad in full armor, with a sharp axe resting on his shoulder. His cold pupils flashed. Do you like it? The bloodied man growled. You are that trash, Gisline? A trap, you say? You mean you knew my plans all along? Gisline slowly advanced. Not just that. I also know how many of you there are, who the spies are and who helped you gather your strength. I knew everything from the start. The man trembled in disbelief. Impossible. I always kept an ace up my sleeve. The bloodied man yelled in frustration. How could you? How dare a useless scum like you? Gisline kicked him squarely in the face. Shut your mouth, he said in a low voice, and the man collapsed completely. Gisline removed the hat he was wearing. Try to invade as many times as you like. I will win this battle and the next one. I will win them all, he said with a confident smirk. Do you know why? Because I know all of your plans. Rewinding 1 year prior, in the kingdom of Luthania near the Perdiem territory, Gisline sat up, his hands trembling as he asked, what just happened? He touched his entire body. Gisline's eyes widened with confusion. I'm still alive? Impossible. Just a minute ago, I was. The minute he was referring to was on the battlefield when Gisline's sword had been knocked away. His body was covered in blood, and the pain was so intense he couldn't help but exclaim, damn it. Gisline slowly lost consciousness. A red-haired young man with a triumphant expression murmured, so, this is how it all ends. Gisline Perdiem, the king of mercenaries and one of the strongest in the continent, he concluded, the battle is over. He was one of the 7 strongest in the continent, the distinguished knight, Idun. He pointed his sword directly at Gisline. Any last words? Gisline lowered his head. It's regrettable that I can't finish my revenge. He looked up at Idun. Die, you sick bastard, one of the 7 strongest in the continent, king of mercenaries, Gisline Perdiem. Idun smirked. How arrogant. I didn't expect you to be the firstborn son of the fallen Perdiem family. You left after your sister died, right? Gisline frowned. How do you know that when you're from another kingdom? At this point, he had nothing left to hide. Idun calmly replied, of course I know. I worked hard to find you, he emphasized, because we are the ones who conspired with the Delphine family to bring down your family. Hearing the word we, Gisline's body stiffened. His spine turned cold. Were there others behind this besides the Duke Delphine family? Idun looked at him with some regret, and held his sword against Gisline's neck. TSK. You're about to die anyway, so there's no point in explaining. Accept your fate. Gisline angrily roared. You bastard, I will never forgive you. Idun's eyes narrowed with interest. Very well. He then swung his sword and beheaded Gisline. Ending the flashback, Gisline held his neck and looked at his reflection in the water. He was still not fully back to his senses. He beheaded me, but my head is still on my neck. He touched his face again. Was it all just an illusion? I look younger too. Gisline stood up and looked around. Have I been captured and become a test subject in a mage's lab? Those arrogant bastards, they will regret letting me live. Suddenly a voice called out, young master. A young man with brown hair pushed open the curtains and entered. Please come out, I know you're awake. It was Ricardo, a soldier of Perdiem. The moment he finished speaking, he noticed a sword pressed against his neck. WH. Gisline behind him said coldly, I will let you live if you answer my questions. Or not, Ricardo cried out in fear, young master. Confirming it was indeed Gisline, Ricardo breathed a sigh of relief. Don't you think you're going a little too far? No, is no. Hearing that Gisline was confused, what is with this reaction? He's being threatened. What are you saying? Ricardo moved away from Gisline. You were in a bad mood and then you fell asleep. What? I did that? He rubbed his neck. You slept it off and forgot everything? You were angry about leading the group to conquer the orcs, remember? Gisline repeated in confusion. Orcs? He asked. What? I was angry? What nonsense are you saying? Ricardo, carrying a bag and a box, didn't even turn to look at him. Gather your things and let's go. Everyone's waiting. Gisline still looked stiff. Things? Where are we going? Ricardo rushed past him. Where are we going? To the Perdiem territory, of course. Gisline's eyes narrowed. What? He turned around and grabbed Ricardo's shoulders. Say that again. Yes? Gisline asked again. Perdiem? You mean the fallen territory? Perdiem? When he arrived at the cliff and looked down, he was still stunned. Remembering the place that had been completely destroyed and comparing it to the scene before him, Gisline was amazed. It's really the per diem territory. Why is it still intact? I saw it turn to dust. Ricardo leaned in and whispered, "Did you have a nightmare or something? Calling your own family a fallen one. If the Count hears, you'll get kicked out." Gisline pinched his cheek. "Am I dreaming?" He released it. A genuine pain struck him, and he exclaimed, "Ouch, guess not." Gisline pieced together everything that had happened since he woke up. A younger face, a territory that was still intact. So that meant, I've gone back to the past? When I was younger, I hated my family. Those childish angry feelings lead to problems. Over time, everyone in the family avoided me. I couldn't endure the criticism and ran away from home. Years later I became a mercenary. I had survived countless battles and developed my skills, building my name. Then I came back to the per diem territory to atone, but my whole family had been turned to dust when I got back. I had lost everything. Gisline looked up at the flag, but now everything was still here. All of the people I loved were still here. He raised his hands to hold back the tears and laughter that were threatening to spill out. "This is unbelievable. I'm so happy that I could sing." But it was still too early to be happy. Gisline turned to look at Ricardo. He said, "We are going to conquer the orcs, right?" I can't forget that day. That was the day where most of my team members died. In the past life, I had followed this group in an attempt to build my name. At that time, the report said that there were only 3 orcs. I thought it would be easy to defeat them, even with the fact that I've never commanded anything before. But when I got there were over 20. Most people died because I was so stubborn and wanted to take the lead. I could have killed them because the orcs did not use any strategy. The problem is, would people trust me when I'm just a useless fool? A base camp flew over his head. It landed right in front of Gisline and shattered. The soldiers shouted in panic, "It's the orcs!" Right after this cry, huge, ferocious orcs also charged in. Everyone was unprepared and could only yell in warning, "The orcs are coming." Gisline jumped and turned to where the sound came from. "They're here already? Did they also come this fast in my past life?" The power of these orcs was much greater than the soldiers. Very quickly, Gisline's side was close to falling. A loud roar echoed, "Get into formation." The commander of the expedition, Skoven, charged forward. "Don't panic, get into defensive formation." The orc roared, causing everything in its path to go flying. Skoven cursed under his breath. "Damn it, we've let our guard down. We got ambushed while unprepared. Their numbers are higher than what was reported. At this rate, we are all going to die." A voice calling out drew his attention. "Commander!" Behind him, Skoven's whole body froze, not even having time to react. A hand touched his shoulder. Gisline pushed Skoven forward and charged towards the orc. He was stunned. "Young master." Right when the orc swung its sharp axe down, Gisline attacked. He plunged his sword into its wrist with a decisive strike. Using even more force, Gisline easily severed the large orc's arm. His swift action astonished Skoven. The surrounding soldiers also stared in shock. The orc roared in pain, then fell to the ground with a thud. Gisline spun his sword. "TSK, guess I can't use mana yet. Wish I had come back sooner." He turned and went to Skoven. "You are the commander, right, young master?" Gisline held out his hand demanding, "Give it here." Skoven was confused. "What is it?" Calmly and collected, Gisline said, "Command." Skoven thought instinctively. "What? Command?" He knew the young master was an idiot. But demanding command while the lives of the soldiers were in danger? He stood up and said decisively, "Absolutely not." "What?" Skoven strode away. "Do you think this is a game? Even if you are the young master, I cannot hand over command so easily." Gisline frowned angrily. This is annoying, even though he would do the same if a random teammate suddenly showed up and demanded command. Before Gisline and Skoven could rest, another large orc charged toward them. Skoven yelled, "Fall back, I'll handle it here. You are still too inexperienced to lead the troops." With no time to think, Gisline threw his hand up. Then there's no choice. The sword flew from his hand. Seeing that their young master just threw his sword away, Skoven grabbed his collar angrily. "What do you think you're doing?" Suddenly, an unnerving silence made him freeze. Skoven turned his head toward the orc that had charged at them. He stared in disbelief as the sword Gisline threw hit the orc directly in the forehead. The orc roared in pain, then collapsed with a thud, in front of his bewildered eyes. Skoven was stunned. How? How did he hit its weak point? Then Gisline spoke up. "Skoven, right? Do you know what's most important in combat?" Looking around at the situation, Gisline said with a face full of confidence, "If our army is afraid, then we will surely not win. We need motivation." After saying that, Gisline pulled the sword out of the orc's head and moved forward. He jumped up in the middle of the battle. Using gravity to his advantage, he stabbed straight down into the head of the nearest orc. Skoven went through one surprise after another. Gisline calmly pulled the sword out. "Come at me, you orcs." Then in the midst of the orcs, he declared, "I will kill you all." Gisline, holding his sharp sword, threw himself at the group of orcs. With his agility he was able to kill them all. Skoven looked at the large orc bodies on the ground, and the heads that had fallen. Am I dreaming? He observed every decisive movement of Gisline. Even though I'm a mana user, I can't do what he's doing. How can a frail young master be able to do this? He clearly looks exhausted. Yet, he is using the smallest movements to evade their attacks, and using his swordsmanship to hit their weak points. He is like a swordsman master without aura, or even greater. On the other side, Gisline challenged loudly, "Is this all you've got? I'm not even warmed up yet." "You don't deserve to be called warriors," Ricardo yelled in shock. "They are all chasing after the young master. Is he planning to run away?" He turned to Skoven, "Commander." Skoven was still standing there, in shock. What in the world is he thinking? Charging into the orcs and attracting their attention is fine, but now he's running away? And that direction is the cliff. His face turned pale. "Wait, the cliff." Skoven uttered his deduction, trembling. "Don't tell me." He immediately turned around and ordered, "Soldiers, create a shield wall." Skoven announced firmly, "We will follow him." On the other side, Gisline, while leading the orcs on, thought, "Skoven, you must have figured out my plan if you are a skilled commander. Even though I prefer to kill them all, my current physical strength won't allow it. Still, this is manageable for him." Footsteps echoed behind Gisline. The orcs turned around in shock. At that moment, Skoven and Ricardo, leading the soldiers, charged in. Gisline grinned. "Perfect." Then, he jumped off the cliff. Gisline looked at them with a challenging expression. "Come on." Skoven at the back yelled loudly, "All soldiers, push them down the cliff." Even though they were huge, they were not fast enough to react to this diversion. They were all quickly pushed down. Everyone worked together and yelled loudly. One by one, the orcs fell off the cliff to their death. The soldiers above panted heavily. "We did it. We killed all the orcs." Skoven ran to the edge and shouted, "Young master." Gisline was hanging onto the cliff by his sword. He had a faint smile on his face. Seeing that he was okay, Skoven was relieved. He reached out, "Here, grab my hand." Seeming to be exhausted, Gisline's hand slipped off his sword. "I can't hold on anymore." All the soldiers, including Skoven, yelled in shock, "Young master." It is unknown how much time has passed. A clear voice spoke up. "Big brother, Brother Gisline?" Gisline recognized the voice. Elena. Fragments of memories appeared again. Inside those fragments was his younger sister. "Mother is gone. Thank you, brother. What's wrong with you lately? You're the worst brother." Gisline reached out and grabbed a piece of memory. This is his memory of Elena. Suddenly, a hand pulled his shoulder. "Brother!" Elena yelled, her eyes brimming with tears. "Let's go together." Then Gisline's eyes snapped open. He looked at the unfamiliar ceiling. Gisline looked at his hand. "I'm alive. It seems that they saved me." He sat up and lowered the blanket. Was it a dream? Suddenly, Gisline stopped. A pain ran through his whole body. He grabbed his stomach. His whole body hurt. Surely the result of trying to push himself to the limit. TSK. It's good that I'm still alive. At this moment, someone opened the door and entered the room. "Young master," a maid said with a happy smile. "You're awake." Gisline was surprised by the person who came in. "Belinda?" She entered with a sigh. "Do you know how worried I was? I told you before, you should have let the soldiers handle the orcs." Before she could finish, Gisline hugged her tightly. Seeing this sudden action, Belinda asked in confusion, "What are you doing? Did I do something wrong?" "No, I'm just happy to see you again." Belinda, my personal tutor. Since I was little, she was always by my side, no matter how foolish I was. But after my family was destroyed and she disappeared, I never got to see her again. I never thought I would see her like this. Belinda's face flushed as she replied softly, "We see each other every day. Why are you so happy?" His eyes became serious, and he made a decision. "I have to tell Belinda the truth." Gisline pushed her away. "Listen carefully. Per Diem will experience a great disaster." "Huh? What are you saying?" Gisline paused. "The truth is that I died and came back to life." Belinda thought that it was nothing serious and laughed. Yes, the orcs almost killed you." Seeing that she misunderstood him, Gisline jumped up. "What? That's not what I mean." Belinda started to pick up the blanket. "Do you know how much danger you put Per Diem in?" Then Belinda started scolding him. Gisline thought, "She doesn't believe me. I guess it won't work." Belinda put her hands on her hips. "Really, what if you get hurt before the festival?" She then reminded him, "The festival." Belinda giggled. "Have you forgotten? Miss Elena is looking forward to going with you to the festival. This is a perfect opportunity for the two of you to grow closer." Gisline looked at the picture of him and his sister. "Right. Around this time of the year there's always a festival." "Yeah, in my past life, I didn't have time to enjoy the festival due to my terrible experiences, he said softly. How long until the festival? Belinda paused to count. Let's see, the festival will be held next week, so you have about half a week. Ghislaine went silent. A week. The day that changed my life. A voice rang from outside the door. Brother. Are you there? His eyes widened and turned around. The memories still haunt me. A memory appeared of Elena grabbing his hand while crying, please go with me. What he was afraid of was, 1 week later, Elena would die. Ghislaine rushed over and hugged Elena tightly. This action surprised Belinda, who stood nearby, completely startled. Elena, caught off guard, finally regained her senses, her cheeks flushing as she spoke shyly. What's going on? What kind of surprise is this? Ghislaine hugged her tightly and said softly, I missed you. However, Elena panicked and pushed him away, yelling, Get off me, you're scaring me. The push caused him to fall backward, groaning, but Belinda was quick to catch him. Ghislaine clutched his chest in pain. What kind of strength is this? Has she always been this strong since she was a kid? Elena, oblivious, dusted herself off and said in annoyance, Belinda told me I'd find you here. What game are you playing? Do you think doing this will make things okay? Ghislaine, bewildered, asked, What do you mean, make what okay? Elena then recounted how he had gotten angry and said hurtful things to her. When he yelled, Hey, you're so annoying that I feel annoyed just watching you breathe. You need to go away. Elena glared at him angrily. Have you forgotten everything already? Ghislaine became embarrassed and confused. Did I really say that? He awkwardly turned away, thinking, I wasn't close to Elena in the past. I was awful. He mumbled apologetically, sorry. Hearing him say this shocked the two of them. Belinda thought she had misheard. Did he just say sorry? Elena's reaction was even more intense. Did you hit your head after being attacked by the orcs? Did you lose it? Seeing their reactions, Ghislaine's face turned dark, speechless. He yelled angrily to explain, No, I'm really okay. Why are you both acting like I was attacked? Which caused them to jump again. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through his chest. He collapsed onto the ground, groaning. Elena, showing no sign of worry, said calmly, Oh, right, you're definitely okay. Then, he lost consciousness. He then saw Elena and Belinda smiling cheerfully at him. He paused for a moment. Smiling slightly, he thought, they are just like I remember. But then he quickly felt regret. Why did I waste so much time on useless things in the past? He remembered what he had done before. During the festival next week, he had refused to go with Elena, feeling angry about having to take responsibility for the expedition team's failures. Elena's tearful face was etched into his mind. That was the last time I saw her. The bloody image of Elena that followed was a big scar in his heart. Elena's body was found torn to pieces along with her guards. The more he thought about it, the more he felt tormented. He clenched his fists. I should have gone with her. Just then, a knock on the door grabbed their attention. A voice spoke, May we come in? Two guards, Jamal and Philip, pushed open the door and entered. Jamal saw Elena and spoke, There you are, Miss Elena. Elena asked, seeing the guards, What is it? I told you to wait outside. Jamal replied, Sorry, the maids asked for you to check on the preparations for the festival. Ghislaine, surprised, asked, Why Elena? Belinda said, Don't you know, young master? Because you are always having fun. I don't know how much the per diem needs help when they need a noble lady to do the work. Hearing this, he could only laugh awkwardly. Ah, ha ha. Looking at Elena saying goodbye, I'm going now. Take care, Ghislaine thought. Are we really short-staffed? It means that I wasn't paying attention to everything. So obviously I don't know. Thinking this, he said, Let me help. Hearing this startled Elena and made her stop. Then she and Belinda showed a horrified look. Belinda stammered, He wants to help? Elena's face was even more expressive. Did he really hit his head? Their reactions left Ghislaine speechless. Sometime later, at a crowded market, Ghislaine and Elena argued, startling everyone around them. He said he would help, but Elena refused. Go away, you're scaring people. She pushed him, causing him pain and distorting his face. Ghislaine yelled angrily, Is this how you treat someone who wants to help? Elena yelled back, The best way you can help is to stand still and not cause trouble. While he was being pushed and having his face distorted, he thought, Elena's body was found near the slums, far from the festival. Someone must have called or kidnapped her there. Remembering the outskirts of the city, to prevent it, he needed to know who was entering and leaving the city. Suddenly, a guard ran towards them and shouted, Young master. Seeing the newcomer, his face showed a hint of surprise. That. Looking at the old man panting and wiping sweat from his brow, Ghislaine called out, Old Fergus? You're okay. Thank heavens, he replied. Fergus immediately ran over to Ghislaine, crying, Your lowly servant, Fergus is here. I rushed over as soon as I heard about the orcs. Ghislaine, feeling dizzy from being shaken, said helplessly, "Can we stop this here?" Elena, on the other hand, was extremely happy. She ran over to the two and said, "Hee hee, perfect timing. Old man, he's been acting strange since he woke up. Please take him back to his room." Fergus replied happily, "As you wish." Ghislaine was angry. "This old man is in my way again." He sighed helplessly. "There is no other choice. I need to know what happened next week." Thinking that, he turned to Fergus and said, "Old man, there's an abandoned training ground in the city, right? Take me there." Fergus asked in confusion. "Yes, the training ground. Why?" Ghislaine replied calmly, "To train." Hearing him say this startled Fergus, who couldn't believe what he had just heard. However, sometime later, inside a large abandoned castle, the old man's voice echoed, "This way." Seeing what was in front of him, Ghislaine was shocked. Before him was a huge training area. He couldn't help but exclaim, "What? It's better than I thought." While walking around, examining everything, Ghislaine thought, "This place is perfect for me to train. I've never seen anything like this when I was a mercenary." The weapons were still intact and very new. Then Fergus spoke, "We've kept it in case you needed it." His expression was a bit sad. "I was sure that you would come here someday." Remembering the past, Fergus had always been tending to this place. Ghislaine was shocked. In the past, he realized something, and his face became solemn. "So that's how it is." Ghislaine went to Fergus, patted his shoulder and said, "I need to live long, old man. Death feels like crap." Hearing him say that, the old man replied, "Yes, you act like you've died once." Ghislaine laughed jokingly, "You're sharp." "I died and came back." But Fergus's expression was serious. "I think you've had enough joking around, young master." Ghislaine turned away, embarrassed, but still added, "Anyway, you can go back now, old man. I'm starting to train." Fergus bowed respectfully. "I'll be waiting outside." Ghislaine glanced at the old man, thinking, "I always treated everyone like enemies." Thinking back at Elena's joyful face, Belinda, and Fergus's dedication, I can't help but blame myself. But I was so naive. With his hands in his pockets, he strolled to the training ground. 1 week. He kept thinking about his past life. A neighboring lord came to his mind. At the time, the one responsible for Elena's death was the neighboring lord. The bloody battlefield at that time was always imprinted in my mind. Because of that, Per Diem fought, and declined. He closed his eyes and pieced together the events. He concluded, Elena's death is the starting point of the downfall of the family. Meaning that Ghislaine's gaze was now sharp and full of determination. I need to fix it from the beginning. Immediately after that, he sat down in the middle of the training area. First, I need to get stronger. Sadly, I don't have much time. Taking a deep breath, he began to train. At least I have to control my mana. A moment later, many mana orbs appeared, floating around him. Mana is a powerful energy that can help humans break their limits. In his mind, memories of him as a mercenary, training on the battlefield, where the dead lay scattered, resurfaced. Everyone says sensing mana is the hardest part, but I did it even on the battlefield. At this time, the mana particles around him were gradually changing. I need to connect with the mana particles in the air. One by one, the mana particles were slowly gathering in the palm of Ghislaine's hand, spinning them into a ball. In his hand, a mana ball had formed. His whole body was glowing. Someone like me, who's been through thousands, no, tens of thousands of battles, can create a mana core like eating candy. But very quickly, his face changed. Ghislaine was sweating profusely, his eyebrows tightly knitted together. But if it's just that, I can't be one of the 7 strongest. He got a very old and worn-out book, and now it had become useful. The method from that magic book I got. The mana core in his hand was continuously changing through the process of being refined. Along with that, mana was bursting from his whole body even more strongly, and with more intense pain and his natural mana core. His mana core began to connect. I can make 2, or even 3. When the connection was completed, it was also the moment when the pain became the most intense. Ghislaine's body also exploded with a massive energy, creating a link between the cores, to create an explosive energy. Immediately after, fresh blood spurted from his nose and mouth. His whole body was sweating and writhing in pain. Ghislaine breathed heavily and painfully. 3 is the limit, even though in the past I could create 5. Another big gulp of blood splattered on the ground, but in his mind, he continued to ponder, this way allows a person to create explosive energy in a short time, but it requires a large amount of mana. Remembering the battle in his past life, he knew that was why he had lost to Idun in his past life. He attacked with his knights when my mana had run out. If it was a fair fight, I would have won. Wiping the blood from his mouth, Ghislaine continued to think about the mana core connection. It's an unstable technique, but it's enough for now. I'm still young and have plenty of time. He slowly stood up with determination and walked outside. This time, I will win, Idun. Thinking about the disgusting people behind the conspiracies, he became even more determined, including that bastard behind the Delphine family. Giseline's face was filled with anger. His eyebrows tightly knit together, his eyes showed his extreme hatred. The ones who destroyed our territory, I will kill them all. Time passed quickly and it was the day of the festival a week later. At the majestic per diem city, Gisline tightened his belt, then he quickly and skillfully put on his side bag. He also attached a sword on his side. With sharp eyes, he confidently walked forward. Elena, seeing him, was startled. Her eyes widened, speechless, but quickly she reacted, pouting and looking at him with contempt. She spoke. "You actually came? What's going on? You never do these things." Gisline replied happily, "Well, as a citizen of per diem, I should at least come to the festival." Hearing this, Elena said scornfully, "You're acting really weird. I heard you've been training all week." Gisline responded with discomfort, "What's wrong with a family heir training to be a knight?" Elena immediately countered, "You never cared about it before." Then she laughed brightly and said, "You were the one who complained so much and wished to be a lord right away." These words stabbed him straight in the head and he couldn't deny it. Seeing that he didn't respond, Elena turned away happily. "Anyway, I like it this way." At this time, she could no longer hide the joy and happiness on her small face. Her eyes were so pure. "It's like my brother from the past has come back." These words caused Gisline to startle and freeze. But very quickly, his eyes turned dark. "I realized some things after a week." Over the past week, he had paid attention to everything around him and realized that because his actions had changed, his impressions and the future had also begun to change. At this time, behind them, Belinda warned Jamal and Philip, "You two, remember to keep the young master out of trouble. We can't let anything happen, especially when there are so many guests visiting." The two replied in unison, "Don't worry, you can find us." The world and the future were now like a chessboard, unpredictable and hard to guess. Major events seemed the same, but it was difficult to assess the impact of his actions on minor events. Gisline thought to himself, "Using the information from the future is my mission." He was like a chess player, needing to master this board. "I need to handle every situation effectively." Gisline reached out to his side bag to check. Preparation complete. A moment later, Gisline and Elena had arrived at a bakery. Elena kept bargaining for the bread. A moment later, he saw her smiling happily, running with him through the streets. A few moments later, in Per Diem City, a voice rang out, "This is so much fun." Elena sat on the steps, looking bored, resting her chin on her hand and said, "But it's kind of boring, just like every year. There's nothing new this year." Gisline, who was still vigilant, thought, "The festival is almost over, but nothing has happened. Is it because I'm with Elena?" Suddenly, he heard someone's voice, "Do you want to see another place?" which caught his attention. On the other side, a guard approached Elena and said, "Our friend says there's a new event being held outside. How about it?" Hearing that, she immediately asked, "Really?" Elena immediately stood up, grabbed the guard's hand and happily left. "That's so much fun." Gisline, realizing it was them, became serious, his eyes cold and sharp. "So, it's you guys." Looking at the two guards Jamal and Philip leading Elena away, their eyes looked at her with a sinister and cunning gaze, the family traitors. Elena had been very happy while playing with her two close guards, her escort knights, Jamal and Philip. They were the most reliable knights because they had protected her since she was little. And in Gisline's memories, in his past life, they were killed while protecting Elena. A moment later, the four of them arrived at an area outside the city. Jamal said enthusiastically, "We're here." But the surroundings were unusually quiet and deserted, without a single person in sight. Elena looked at the scene before her, glanced around for a while, then became annoyed. "What's this? There's nothing here. Are you sure there's a performance in a filthy place like this?" Jamal replied awkwardly, Maybe they're not ready yet." Gisline, who had been silent all this time, observed his surroundings. Jamal continued to comfort her. "They'll be here soon." But Elena became even angrier and yelled, "Don't talk nonsense. You want to perform in a place like this?" He could feel clearly what was happening. He frowned with discomfort. Of course, he had noticed the unusual nature of the wooden crates. At first glance, it was just a deserted street. There were wooden crates and objects scattered on the ground, but if you look closer, you can see that there were obstacles blocking any escape route. He was thinking, they must have prepared this in advance, when suddenly a force pulled him away. "Let's go." Elena, sullenly, dragged Gisline with her. Jamal, on the other side, kept babbling. "Miss, we came all this way, don't you want to see the show?" She replied sullenly, "No, thank you. I don't want to watch a performance in a place like this." Gisline, who had been silent, spoke up as he was being dragged along. "Did you train or something? How are you so strong?" Elena, who was angry, turned to look at him, confused. At this moment, One of the guards blocked her path. Miss, bumping into his armor, which startled Elena. Philip, showing a disgusting, scary face, said, "Just wait a little longer." Seeing his expression frightened Elena, her voice stuttered, "Philip." At this point, she realized something was wrong and leaned closer to Ghislain, a little scared. "You're acting strange. What's wrong with you?" Jamal continued to act, bowing slightly as if he was uncomfortable. "Oh my, I didn't mean to scare you." But the moment he looked up, his expression had changed completely. His face was accompanied by a vile smile. "It's just that someone has a reasonable request." Elena looked shocked, her eyes wide. Just then, someone else appeared before her. It was a person with a light green cloak and a wide yellow hat covering their face. Following behind him were two guards in black. It was none other than Frank. He looked at the four people on the other side and frowned. "Indeed, your work is very thorough." Hearing Frank's words, Jamal turned and walked towards him. He said triumphantly, "Of course, we brought the young lady as promised. Let's finish this transaction here." Frank noticed something. He raised his eyebrow, and his lips curled into a faint smile. "Isn't that the eldest son of the per diem family? I don't remember requesting for him to be brought here." Ghislain remained calm. But Elena, at his side, had tears in her eyes. She was scared and trembled as she held his arm tightly. Jamal, after hearing what Frank said, immediately replied, "I will give him up for free. He was stupid enough to follow us without knowing this was his grave." Ghislain, hearing those words, spoke calmly. "Jamal, so you sold us out? Do you really think you can get away with this?" As if hearing a joke, Jamal laughed. His face and voice were filled with ridicule. "Why don't you worry about yourself? We just need to run away somewhere far." In his eyes, the bustling and lively per diem was no different than a poor and despicable place. "We're tired of this poor land. We're getting harassed by the barbarians anyway," Jamal continued, speaking and laughing triumphantly. His expression was arrogant. "I'm sure there are many others besides us who want to leave per diem, right?" At this moment, while he was still laughing arrogantly, Ghislain was in front of him before he knew it. A sword moved lightly across his body, making him unable to react. When Jamal realized what had happened, it was too late. Fresh blood gushed from his mouth and wound, and his body was already severed. Elena and Philip, who were on the side, were shocked and terrified, their eyes wide. Even Frank, seeing Ghislain's action, frowned. Standing in front of Jamal's severed body, he remained confident and cold. "But at least, they will never sell us." His eyes were sharp and cold as he glanced at Philip, "Right?" Philip, still not scared, held Elena tightly with one hand and gripped the sword at his side with the other, shouting, "That stupid Jamal! A knight who loses to an amateur like you." But very quickly he had to shut up. A sharp sword was stabbed straight through his head. Philip was dumbfounded, his eyes wide. When he realized what had happened, it was too late. His whole body was trembling. Impossible. Then, he fell to the ground with a thud, the sword still embedded in his head. Elena fearfully ran to her brother. The two henchmen behind Frank, seeing this scene, were doubtful. The one on the right said, "Is he really the eldest son of the per diem family?" The other one added, "We thought he had no combat experience or any basic training." Frank, who had been watching silently, frowned and said, "Don't be fooled by his appearance. It is him." In his heart, he couldn't help but think about what had happened. Although they dropped their guard, he immediately killed the two knights. Ghislain attacked decisively and took down the two using mana-infused attacks. On this side, Elena clung to him, tears streaming down her face as she trembled with fear. "Brother, what's going on?" But Ghislain didn't answer. He was silent. She was extremely panicked and scared, and facing her brother's silence, she kept calling, "Brother." But before Elena could finish, Ghislain used his hand to strike the back of her neck. He gently laid the unconscious Elena down to the side, saying softly, "Rest." At this moment, Frank's voice echoed from behind, making Ghislain's face darken, his eyes cold. "Thank you for doing my job for me, the eldest son of the per diem family," he said calmly as he walked past the corpse of the knight and towards Ghislain. "You are very different from what I've heard. We intended to take care of the two ourselves." He lifted his pipe to his mouth, took a puff, and said curiously, "Have you always been hiding your true skills?" Ghislain was calm. He stepped forward and gently pulled his sword out of Philip's head. "What's it to you?" He lifted the sword, glanced behind him and made a mental count. 3 people, huh? Looking around, he noticed that Frank radiated a tremendous amount of mana. The two next to him were not worth noting, but the one in the middle emitted mana at a completely different level. He started to channel his energy, his body also gradually emitting mana. "I need to finish this quickly." Calmly turning to face the 3, he said plainly, "Let me ask you one question. Who requested this?" Frank replied arrogantly, "Well, do the dead need to know this?" As if he had anticipated that response, he showed no signs of anger or impatience. "I know you wouldn't reveal it so easily. It's okay. Then, he held his sword in front of him. His body was channeling mana, and his eyes were so sharp that they were terrifying. You will want to say it soon enough. Seeing the situation, one of Frank's henchmen said, "Should we take his head?" Frank stopped him. "No. Capture him alive, break his limbs, so he can do nothing but go crazy." He smirked, his eyes revealing his wickedness and cruelty. He needs to suffer so he can reach that perfect state. The two immediately obeyed the orders and charged towards Gisline. "Yes, sir." Gisline reacted quickly and took a stance. He threw a flare toward the two rushing towards him, his sword in hand. Seeing what was flying at them, one of them paused in confusion. A flare? But that hesitation was his downfall. A swift sword cut the flare in half in front of his astonished eyes. Immediately after, Gisline, with his sharp sword, fiercely stabbed the middle of his head. The man quickly fell to the ground. The other one charged forward, swinging his sword dismissively. Amateur. But Gisline reacted quickly, bringing his sword behind his back and successfully stopping the other's attack. His sharp eyes glanced quickly. Then, he held the sword behind his back with one hand and swung his other hand over the sword, striking the black-clad man's arm. Quickly, he successfully stole the sword from him and swung his sword. In one swift motion, Gisline severed the man's head. But suddenly, he sensed something behind him. From behind, Frank had attacked him, delivering a powerful blow to his back. But Gisline's reaction was also very fast. He was able to bring his sword behind him to stop Frank's attack. Seeing that his attack had failed, Frank frowned. "You blocked my attack at that position? That was a perfect sneak attack." At this moment, when Frank was distracted, Gisline quickly turned around, facing him, which caught him by surprise. He quickly swung his sword and cut Frank's neck. The sword moved across Frank's neck, causing blood to spurt, and the pipe in his mouth was cut off and fell out. Frank's pipe fell to the ground. Right at that moment, a blast of sword energy shot toward Gisline's head. Gisline was surprised, but he quickly reacted, raising his sword and blocking the attack. The wound on Frank's neck was now covered by a layer of mana, and he smiled mockingly. "Impressive. If it weren't for mana, I would have lost my head." Gisline was gritting his teeth, barely holding back Frank's attack, and thought, how is he still alive after a blow to the neck? Is he focusing his mana around his neck to reduce damage? Then, a massive wave of mana came from Frank's hand into his sword. "I don't know where you learned that strange swordsmanship at your age, but," Frank smirked, his eyes showing his murderous intent, "you will die here." Frank, with a triumphant look on his face, said mockingly, "Impressive. If it weren't for reinforcing my body with mana, my head would have already fallen off." As he spoke, he tightened his grip on the sword in his hand. "I don't know where you learned that strange swordsmanship." Frank swung his sword toward Gisline, his voice filled with sarcasm. "But you can't defeat me with that weak mana." With a smug look, he grinned grotesquely. "You will die here." Gisline calmly blocked Frank's attack with his sword, a mysterious smile playing on his lips. Gisline's smile shattered Frank's arrogance. His face froze slightly. "He's smiling?" He pushed Gisline away, making him stumble backward. Gisline took advantage of the moment, flipping backward, and then kicked Frank directly in the face. Both of them were forced backward by the impact. Frank's face flushed from the kick, and the glasses he wore were broken on one side. But he still showed his disdain for his opponent. "Didn't I tell you? That amount of mana won't work." Suddenly, his eyes widened and blood trickled from the corners of his mouth. Frank collapsed onto the ground, clutching his chest in agony. "Oog." Frank's body began to shake. His breath was shallow and labored. "What just happened?" The power of the attack just now was different. He couldn't have penetrated my reinforcement with just that level of skill. Gisline walked up to him. "I never thought there would be a mastermind behind Elena's death." A dark red aura surrounded him. His hands gripped his sword tightly. "So, it was you?" His eyes showed extreme resentment. "Prepare yourself." A white orb radiating a ruby-red light appeared. Third core, release. Frank couldn't believe what he saw. Grinding his teeth. "What? How can you amplify your mana so much?" Gisline suddenly raised his sword and jumped towards Frank. He was too shocked to react. Too fast. He moved his sword in the blink of an eye. The bullet-like gaze of his eyes blazed with anger. Gisline slashed down fiercely at Frank. Too bad. He was able to block that fatal blow. Frank's hands holding the sword trembled. "Impossible. My hands are trembling just from blocking his attack?" The sword in Frank's hand cracked. Even with draining his mana, there was a limit. In a panic, he backed away from Gisline's blade. "I've never heard of a method to maximize mana like this." In Frank's eyes, Gisline was now strangely powerful, his skills improving rapidly, as if he had transformed into someone else. With just one slash from Gisline, Frank's sword was shattered into hundreds of pieces. With his sword broken, he lost all his initial contempt. His body was hurt each time the sword grazed him. Gisline gritted his teeth. gripping his sword tightly and charged straight towards Frank. His sword pierced through Frank's body. He screamed in extreme pain. Ghislaine grabbed his neck tightly, pinning him against the cold wall and taunting him. "Let's finish the conversation we had earlier." His voice became emotionless. "Who requested this from you?" Although he was restrained, he didn't give in. A dart-like object slid from his sleeve. "Ugh, I won't fall so easily." Frank raised his hand, his voice full of hatred. "At least I'll take the per diem's young lady with me." He threw the dart in his hand toward Elena. "Die." Suddenly, mana threads appeared out of nowhere, binding his hand tightly, stopping his insane actions. Ghislaine, with one hand holding his sword, pulled the threads tightly with the other, and said coldly, "Let's make a deal." His eyes showed anger. "Don't try anything useless. Answer my question, and I'll pull out my sword." Frank gritted his teeth. The pain from his abdomen and hand was causing his face to turn pale. "These threads are made of mana? He can't move. When did he make these?" In his memories, Ghislaine was weak and incompetent, and the mana threads in his hands were difficult to use. Ghislaine's hand trembled as he rotated his sword slightly, causing blood to gush out. "Surely someone of your level knows how to heal a wound." He looked straight into Frank's fearful eyes, threateningly. "But what if I destroy your mana core?" These words panicked Frank. His eyebrows furrowed. "What?" Ghislaine channeled all of his power and attacked Frank's abdomen, making him feel as if his body was about to explode into 1,000 pieces. He screamed in pain and panic. Frank could feel his strength disappearing. His mana was being dispersed. He yelled out in vain, "Are you crazy? If there's a mistake, the backflow of mana will explode this entire area. You want to commit suicide?" Ghislaine scoffed mockingly. "Only those without skill would do that." He confidently declared, "I can handle it." Cracks began to appear on Frank's body, and his vitality was seeping out. He wasn't lying. He saw the death in Ghislaine's eyes. "I'm going to die." Frank was still pinned against the wall, his body shaking, his voice filled with panic. "He's the one who requested this. He said he needed a reason to start a war with the per diem and Degarda families." Ghislaine frowned slightly, a contemplative look on his face. "Is that so?" So it was Desmond. A memory flashed in his mind. The cloaked figures are behind everything. In his past life, these dirty deeds would be handled by the families allied with the Duke, Duke Delphine. "How dare you arrange this ridiculous thing without a powerful backer?" He grabbed Frank's neck tightly. "So that's why you wanted to kill Elena?" "Yes." Ghislaine stabbed his sword straight into Frank's body. Frank's eyes widened in pain. He lost his composure. "What are you doing? This isn't what you said before." "Ugh." His eyes were cold, his voice mocking. "So what? You've killed countless people, but now you're afraid of being killed?" Ghislaine was stunned when he laughed loudly, a laugh filled with mockery and glee. Seeing Ghislaine's indifference, Frank said triumphantly, "Killing me won't change anything. I've already finished my job with Degarda. Do you think anyone will believe the words of a brat like you?" Ghislaine pushed him away, stopping him from speaking. "Per diem will die in the war." He grabbed Frank's head tightly. "Listen to me. I was reborn after death." He smiled contentedly. "So this time will be different." Ghislaine channeled his power into his sword, and Frank's body slowly cracked into 1,000 pieces. As night fell, a streak of light appeared in the sky. Suddenly, the streak of light exploded, creating countless rays. Ghislaine stood there, looking at the cold body in front of him, and the blood splattered on the walls. Around him, everywhere was full of cold bodies. Some wore steel armor but had died a brutal death. He turned slightly, his sharp eyes looking around. He suddenly noticed Elena was still there, on the cold ground. Ghislaine dropped the sword in his hand. The sword clanged as it hit the ground. He relaxed, looking up at the sky. Suddenly, his face changed, his eyes wide. He fell to the ground, coughing up blood, his body shaking. Ghislaine wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, displeased. "Damn it, when I was the king of mercenaries, exploding 3 cores wasn't a problem," he shouted loudly. The shout echoed everywhere. "I will not fall because of this." He kicked the door and stormed into a warehouse. 2 corpses wrapped up carefully were placed on the rubble. Ghislaine clutched his chest, his eyes assessing his surroundings. In his past life, they found another body next to Elena in this place, based on what the guy said earlier. A noble, a man of standing, was staring intently at the phoenix emblem on the wall. He recognized one of the bodies on the ground, the son of Degarda. He considered the possible scenarios. It seems like he was killed along with his escort knight, so this is how they silenced them and blamed them for killing Elena. In the future, war can break out at any time. Once this is revealed, the war will. Ghislaine pulled a candle out of his pocket. "I have to destroy the evidence." He set the house ablaze and, carrying Elena, left. "I won't let everything happen according to your plan." His actions were seen by the man wearing a black cloak. He disappeared from the scene. Failure. In a dark room, A round table stood in the center, where a secret meeting was being held. The arguments grew more intense. We sent the knights and Frank, the best we had. You couldn't even handle a kid. Did you drop your guard because you thought it would be easy? The man in the black cloak knelt, presenting his report. His face was furious, teeth clenched, and sweat poured down like rain. It was all because of Gisline per diem. Whispers began to rise. Gisline, the useless one from the north? A cold voice, laced with death, came from a tall man, and the whispers faded. Surely you know that Gisline is just a piece of useless trash. Are you using him as an excuse? The man in the black cloak's eyes showed hatred. He was completely different from the information and rumors we had. An image of Gisline per diem appeared in his memory. The sharpness of his eyes like the sword in his hand. His vision is very sharp. His movements are quick and agile. Decisive attacks, fatal hits directly on his opponent's face. His feet were planted on the ground. A sword swing stole half of the enemy's body. Graceful movements, avoiding all the enemy's attacks. His eyes glowed with a violet light, revealing his bones. Gisline moved quickly from one side to the other, making it impossible for the enemy to see. Then he plunged his sword, bringing them to the brink of death. Frank was in pain, his mouth wide open, screaming helplessly. From the flames, Gisline carried the girl out. A trembling voice said, "His mana-using abilities are beyond human," as if he had transformed into a different person. The man in black continued to make excuses, "But we already finished our work with Dagarda, so there's no need to worry about starting the war on the territory. Please give me another chance." Ignoring his pleas, the others in the room spoke up. "Shut up. You didn't even find enough information about a kid. Do you know how much this has hampered us? You couldn't even complete a simple task and you're asking for another chance?" They were filled with resentment, teeth gnashing. "Erase him." Silence fell when the man sitting in the highest position, on the tall chair, spoke up. So noisy. The cold voice echoed, "Yes." The leader said with a hoarse voice, "What kind of chance do you want?" The man in black quickly made his request, "I will eliminate Gisline per diem." The man on top said sarcastically, "How?" He replied quickly, "I will create a one-on-one duel naturally." His voice slowed. "I have thought of someone." The others began to lose patience. "Who is it?" The mysterious person that the cloaked man mentioned was a muscular, heavily built man, wielding a large, sharp weapon. His name was Cain Loges. He was known for his swordsmanship, relying purely on strength. Numerous bloodied blades had been shattered in his hands. Despite his young age, he was a symbol of power. I can confidently say that no one in the north is as strong as him. Suddenly, he became anxious. Moreover, Cain is related to Gisline, so there's no need to force them to meet. The others around the table fell eerily silent. The man on the top spoke with a threatening tone. "If you fail again," his eyes were like bullets, "there will be no second chances." As if he had struck gold, the cloaked man quickly promised, "I will not disappoint you." A majestic ancient city appeared under the sun, per diem training area. Fergus stood to the side cautiously and said, "Excuse me, young master, it's time for lunch." A mana thread flashed, emitting an emerald green light. It wrapped around the sword next to Fergus, startling him. The sword was pulled away in a flash. The one who had caught the sword was Gisline per diem. He swung the sword a few times, ignoring Fergus' presence. "All right, that's enough." Then he seemed surprised. "Oh, Mr. Fergus, sorry. I was too focused on training." Fergus expressed his surprise at Gisline's actions. "How did you do that just now? You used mana to create a thread that lifted the sword?" He introduced what he just did. Mana threads, using mana like a string. A memory from his past life flashed before his eyes, the image of him struggling with mana threads. "In my past life, I always used it, but at my current skill level, I need to explode my core to use it like before, because I lack mana." In this life, he had mastered the technique of using mana threads, but if I only create one thread to use less mana, I can still use it even if I don't have much mana. Fergus was surprised at Gisline's skill in using mana. "I have trained with mana for a long time, but I've never seen anything like this." He felt somewhat doubtful. Just a few days ago, he wasn't using mana, practicing alone. How could he have come up with the idea of using mana like this? Gisline looked at him suspiciously. "What do you want?" "Oh, well, actually," before his indifferent gaze, Fergus stammered, "I just wanted to come and say that, thank you for protecting the young lady." "You're thanking me?" He thought, "It's the least I could do." An image of a grand and ancient city appeared. "Let's go eat." A few days passed. The carefully prepared festival looked bleak and deserted. The festival was suspended due to a knight's betrayal attempt to sell off the young lady. Elena looked sullen and sulky. "Everyone thinks I'm lying when I say that it was you who saved me." Her voice was filled with dissatisfaction. "You should say something to them." "It's okay, they wouldn't believe me anyway." Belinda angrily clenched her fist in agreement. Jamal and Philip were the ones who betrayed you, right? Those bastards, I knew they were perverts. Ghislaine smiled happily, looking at the girl in front of him. Elena is alive. He glanced out the window. I can prevent a war from breaking out, but they definitely won't give up. His eyes flashed with a hint of helplessness. I can't prevent them by myself forever. I need to build an army. The maid's voice broke the silence of the room. Excuse me. Ghislaine ignored them and kept thinking, I need to learn more about politics in order to do that. On the plate in front of him was only a simple dessert. This surprised him, his eyes widening. Ghislaine pointed at the plate of food in front of him, and said lazily, Belinda, why are we having dessert first? Dessert? You know our current situation. Before he could understand what she meant, a series of deafening sounds made him jump. A fat man with a goatee was yelling loudly, compensate for the damages you caused by canceling the festival. Behind him, dozens of people were shouting loudly, compensation, compensation, compensation. The more they shouted, the more out of control they became, overpowering the guards at the gate. Get out of here. Are you swimming in money? Please calm down. Ghislaine instinctively leaned out of the window. What the hell? Belinda said nonchalantly, I knew they would act like this. She explained helplessly, you know, our district has many merchants who make a living from the festival's profits. Last year was good enough for them. The merchant riots erupted, but because the festival was cancelled after just one day, they were understandably disappointed. Ghislaine couldn't believe what he had just heard. Is our district really that bad? He turned sharply, his face worried. This isn't good. They will only get more angry if I don't do anything for them. Ghislaine pointed outside and ordered the maid, Mr. Fergus, what are the guards doing? Send them to calm down the crowd. Fergus looked at him awkwardly. We don't have any guards. What? He explained helplessly, the guards have gone to complete their mission. Most were sent to the monster forest to rebuild that area due to the orc attacks. Oh, damn it, they're all gone? On the map, the locations of the areas were displayed. The northern fortress, the monster forest, the city of Perdium. Perdium was basically in a constant state of war due to the barbarians in the north. On the other hand, there was a monster forest where monsters could appear at any time. Ghislaine looked displeased, his eyes filled with calculation. No money, no soldiers, a complete mess. He put his arm around Belinda's shoulder. Elena looked at him questioningly. Belinda, come here and talk. He cautiously asked Belinda, you are the one managing the money, right? Use that money to appease the merchants. Contrary to his expectations, she bluntly said, there's no more money. Ghislaine went from one surprise to another, his face blank. Why isn't there any more money? Don't you remember that the count cut your allowance because you spent money like water? He suddenly realized the reality. Wait, so I don't have any money at all? All of it is gone? Helpless, he cheekily held out his hand as if ordering Belinda, and received a hopeless answer. Give me some money. Huh, I don't have any money. Ghislaine Perdium sat on the windowsill, contemplating the scenery around the fortress. Damn it, no money, no soldiers, so what? His eyes showed a thoughtful expression. Without money, I can't do anything. Even with knowledge from the future, it's useless. I need to get money first. The sound of hurried footsteps cut through his thoughts. Is there any way? Isn't there something at the estate? A soldier rushed in, his voice like a shout in Ghislaine's ear. Young master. He quickly stepped down from the window, asking curiously, Ricardo, what's the matter that you're in such a hurry? Ricardo's voice couldn't hide his panic, and his face was pale. There's trouble. Young Master Kane wants to see you. Ghislaine froze at Ricardo's words. Kane? Scovin, with a battered face, his right eye was bruised and swollen. He had taken a devastating punch, making his head spin. The owner of that gigantic fist must be a tall, heavily built man. He continuously delivered fatal blows to Scovin. His chest still bore the imprint of his powerful fist. When Scovin faltered and fell backward, Ghislaine was standing at the door. Scovin's face was distorted, and his body trembled. Young master. Ghislaine was shocked by the scene in front of him. But quickly, his eyes became sharp and full of hatred. So, it's you. A large, muscular man, with a defined six-pack, blocked his view. That's Kane Loges. Loges' voice was mocking. Ghislaine. Ghislaine Perdium, under the seemingly disdainful gaze of Kane Loges, also glanced at him, and exclaimed in surprise, Ah! Kane Loges and his companion laughed and stared at him mockingly. Ghislaine pondered. I remember this face. The heir of the Loges family, an ally of mine. Kane Loges. He remembered the image of him as a child, when he was his only friend. Kane Loges looked at him with a frightening gaze and a terrifying smile, but he was also his enemy. Ghislaine Perdium looked back at him, guarded and tense. Scovin, with his chest pierced, lay on the ground, trembling in pain. Kane Loges slowly descended the stairs, lightly walking towards him. Ghislaine Perdium asked the soldier behind him, Ricardo, what's going on? Ricardo, sweating profusely, replied tensely. Ah, you see. Then, Ricardo lowered his head in worry. We received a report of a disturbance at the tavern. He carefully recounted what had happened. When Scoven and I arrived, Kane Loges was sitting on a chair, calmly watching us with his attendants. We also learned that Kane had arrived with his escort knight. He recognized us, so he asked about the rumors regarding young Master Gieslein. While Scoven was nervously explaining, Kane slowly drank his tea, so Commander Scoven gave him a detailed explanation of the rumor. Suddenly, he was grabbed by the neck while talking, completely unexpectedly. Ricardo's face still showed some fear. That's why this happened. Kane Loges, standing opposite him, protested, "Hey, if you're going to say it right." He said that you, someone who has never trained before, took down an orc with your bare hands and also dealt with the betraying escort knights yourself. Scoven's face was swollen and he couldn't even open his eyes, he just kept trembling in pain. So I gave him a little warning to wake him up. Then, he used his massive body to stand in front of Gieslein. This wouldn't have happened if you hadn't lied in the first place. Gieslein glanced at him with a hint of restraint, saying nothing. Gieslein per diem assessed him somberly. Yeah, he really is this type of person, always treating me like his subordinate. When he was young, Kane Loges would carelessly drink his water while pulling Gieslein's hair. Every time he came to per diem, he would cause trouble. Even though he was causing chaos, no one dared to say a word because Gieslein was his subordinate. His eyes suddenly became sharp. No one dared to look down on Kane. Gieslein per diem silently compared himself to Kane. Unlike him, who always felt inferior, Kane's confidence and bold demeanor were praised as worthy qualities of an heir. Gieslein per diem calmly closed his eyes, thinking, that's why I was criticized even more. Kane Loges looked down at him without saying anything. He smiled mockingly, thinking, look at this guy. Ha. Usually, he would have attacked me with this much provocation. Earlier, at the Loges residence, Kane Loges was listening to instructions with a surprised expression. What? Kill Gieslein? A cloaked person was informing him, if you complete this mission, the higher-ups will support the Loges family. Hearing this, Kane Loges was silent for a moment. Then he spoke up, expressing his dilemma. Dealing with a kid like him isn't difficult, but Gieslein is also an heir. Why would I take his life? He casually held out his hand, stating his plan. We can lure him into a duel and create an accident. It will just look like a normal dispute between heirs. To further bolster his credibility, he continued, I will go along with you, disguised as an escort knight, to manage the situation, so you don't have to worry. The cloaked man's eyes were very malicious. This is a rare opportunity for you. Kane Loges hesitated. I have to take the life of my cousin, Gieslein. Then, he came to a decision and rubbed his fists. Let's go. Returning to the present, Kane Loges glanced at the figure behind him, speculating about the reasons behind the events. They want to eliminate him because something has changed? He smirked. If that's the case, Kane Loges provoked Gieslein per diem. Hey, what are you doing? I'm being very contemptuous and not even bothering to respond. He sat down on the steps below, deliberately asking, why are you still standing there? Now that you're here, you should bring me what you prepared for me. Gieslein seemed confused by what he meant by prepared. Kane Loges began to plot against him. I heard the festival was cancelled. Let's stir up the atmosphere and enjoy this wonderful moment together. We're always the same when it comes to these things, aren't we? His eyes flashed with mockery. Am I wrong, my friend? Gieslein per diem put his hand in his pocket, trying to make sense of what he said. Then he realized something and exclaimed, Ah, you're talking about that, huh? Gieslein per diem gave Kane Loges a look of disgust. Yes. This guy always asks me to prepare alcohol and women whenever he comes here. Gieslein clearly unwillingly turned his head, thinking, I had to agree to his request in order to avoid being hit. But this isn't happening anymore. Because of him, I have to waste my precious money. He remembered Belinda smiling helplessly at him. You forgot that your father cut your allowance because you're wasting too much money? Gieslein per diem's eyes widened when he remembered something. His eyes lit up. It was here all along. Inside his pupils was an image of Kane Loges, smiling at him. My source of money. Suddenly, he shouted, making Gieslein jump. Hey, Gieslein. He propped himself up, looking impatient. If you remember, then bring them here quickly. Can't you see I'm waiting? Kane Loges was surprised when he heard him respond, yes, of course. I should bring them right away, but, Gieslein per diem approached Kane Loges, looking down angrily. Don't you have a debt to pay me? The cloaked figure was confused by what he was seeing. Kane Loges frowned and shouted angrily, pay what? Gieslein calmly smiled and held out his hand. I know that I have to handle everything you asked for with my own money, right? Pay up. 1,000 gold, both the principal and the interest. Kane Loges frowned uncomfortably. What? 1,000 gold? All those things aren't even worth 1,000 gold, he said matter-of-factly, and you're doing that as a thank you for me being your friend. That's a friendship fee. Kane Loges trembled at being exposed. Friendship? I'm your doormat. Ghislaine per diem's face suddenly became terrifying. So, pay up before I kick you out of here. I really need the money, you know that. The atmosphere immediately became silent. No one dared to say anything. Ricardo also thought in disbelief. Young master, what are you saying? Kane Loges stomped on the floor and stood up with a sigh. He used his large frame to intimidate Ghislaine. You're acting so boldly because I've been too lenient with you, huh? He bent down, his face close to Ghislaine's. You seem to believe that you're really stronger just because you spread rumors about defeating a knight, huh? His eyes were filled with disdain. You are nothing more than a parasite clinging to this land. The more Kane Loges spoke, the angrier he became, clenching his fists. That's why everyone in the north calls you a scoundrel. An heir who only knows how to talk nonsense. He vigorously swung his fist, yelling at him, Wake up! Ghislaine per diem simply stood still, lowering his head without doing anything. He gently moved to the side, easily avoiding Kane Loges's clumsy attack, leaving him stunned. Ricardo and the cloaked figure were also surprised. Another quick and powerful punch was thrown by him, accompanied by an angry voice, You bastard! But Ghislaine per diem was able to avoid it again. The face of Kane Loges, from Ghislaine per diem's perspective, was terrifying. But he simply punched him in the stomach. Kane Loges was shocked, his eyes rolling back. However, this time Kane Loges was able to easily block the punch in the palm of his hand, and smiled dismissively. Ghislaine per diem was stunned by his next action. Suddenly, Kane Loges collapsed, screaming in pain, and spat out mouthfuls of blood onto the floor. The cloaked man worriedly rushed over to help him up, asking anxiously, Young master, are you okay? Ghislaine per diem put his hand in his pocket, coldly looking at the man on the ground. Get up. Don't whine. I know you blocked that punch. The cloaked man angrily held Kane Loges's arm and shouted at Ghislaine, Back off, Ghislaine. Do you know what you're doing? The people on the balcony looked down in panic, whispering, What was that? Ghislaine punched Kane? Did anyone see clearly? Ghislaine per diem glanced upwards, suddenly realizing everything. Aha! He smiled coldly. So you want to play it this way? Kane Loges chuckled, turning his head to the cloaked man, whispering, How was my acting? The cloaked man smiled and replied, Excellent, you've perfectly set the stage to make everyone think that the fault lies with Ghislaine. This is more than enough to have a duel. Kane Loges put his hand in his pocket, thinking, Of course, this is a rare opportunity to gain such strong support. I have to make sure to leave an unforgettable impression this time. Remembering what the cloaked man had told him earlier made Kane Loges very excited. If you complete this mission, the higher-ups will support the Loges family. He took a blue glove out of his pocket, and smiled wickedly. This is the perfect time to cut off the weakening per diem family. Kane Loges raised the glove, about to throw it at him and shouted, How dare you? You're tarnishing the dignity of the nobility with lies, attacking me just because I wanted to clarify the truth? Ghislaine, I challenge you to a duel. Before he could finish, a brown glove from Ghislaine hit him directly in the face. Ghislaine said with determination, I challenge you to a duel, Kane Loges. Seeing the glove on his face, Kane Loges was dumbfounded. Ghislaine said coldly, stating his reasons, You slandered me, an heir, in front of the people of per diem, attacked my knight, and insulted the dignity of the nobility. His words were so powerful that even Ricardo, who was helping Scoven on the ground, had to stop and look over. Ghislaine per diem's face became very sharp. You're not going to refuse, are you? Kane Loges and the cloaked man were stunned for a moment, seeing their plan being thwarted. He raised his hand to wipe his lips, and then a bright smile appeared on his face. He, I knew you were stupid, but I didn't think you were stupid enough to dig your own grave. He then drew his sword from his back. All right, I accept your challenge. Kane Loges pointed his sword at Ghislaine, saying arrogantly, Even if you die, don't regret it. Ghislaine per diem smiled, exuding an infinite confidence, looking directly at him. Then he turned and called out, Ricardo. Huh, yes? Ricardo replied, startled. A gray sky covered the entire castle. The atmosphere that had been heated to a climax suddenly cooled down, leaving the visitors with lingering regrets. The participants were all carrying many bags of money on their waists. They were probably in a state of not fully breaking out, because they couldn't spend money or waste time. Ghislaine per diem racked his brain, thinking, in this situation, if an event is held to appease them. Countless people around the arena cheered and encouraged. The sound was very lively. The two people in the middle of the arena were very imposing with their weapons in hand. The people around them began to guess who would win. This is a match between young Master Kane and Ghislaine. Bet your money on young Master Kane. That bastard will finally get what he deserves. Around them, the stalls were also enthusiastically inviting customers. Cheap, buy one get one free. The visitors passing by also cheered excitedly. Look at this. A person hosting the betting excitedly called out, "Come on, anyone who wants to bet, line up." Countless gold and silver coins were thrown up, mixed with the boisterous shouts. "I bet on young Master Kane, me too. This is the safest bet." Kane Loges slammed his sword into the arena floor, almost cracking it. He angrily reprimanded, "How dare you turn a sacred duel into a marketplace like this?" Kane Loges warned in a deep voice, "Let me make it clear before we start. Even if you surrender, my sword won't stop." Gisline per diem silently looked at him without saying anything. Right, he nearly knew everything they were plotting, and that was certainly what he was thinking. Gisline impatiently said, preparing to start, "Now then, it seems like the audience is all here, let's start." Before he could finish, a very loud voice interrupted, "Wait," making Gisline per diem stop and glance. The cloaked man stepped forward and raised both hands. "This way, we can't bet." The visitors around him looked confused at his words and actions. The person hosting the bet took a look at his notes and said, No one is betting on Duke Gisline, so." Gisline glared at him in annoyance. The people participating in the betting also chimed in, whispering loudly, "Frankly speaking, the outcome is already clear. How can he win against young Master Kane? Someone, please bring a fool who's betting on the other side here." Kane Loges laughed mockingly, "Oh my, even the marketplace is ignoring you." While the cloaked man was speaking, a person approached slowly from afar. "Can we change the betting content? Change it to how long he can withstand young Master Kane." That person placed a bag of money on the table, making the host stunned. Ricardo, supporting Scoven whose face was still injured, came forward, holding a bag of money. "I bet on Duke Gisline." Gisline per diem smiled with satisfaction. A bag of money, even bigger than Scoven's, was thrown on top of the old one. Elena and Belinda looked at each other coldly. "I'll bet on my brother too." Everyone was shocked when they heard her voice. Even Gisline per diem had to turn around in surprise. The visitors around her exclaimed in confusion, "Miss Elena?" She folded her arms before the table with great poise. "Is this enough?" Belinda, on the side, looked more hesitant. "Remember, I advised you not to do this." The host, overjoyed, quickly opened the bag and counted the money. "Ah yes, this is enough." The cloaked man turned away in annoyance, seeing that someone had come to ruin his fun. Kane Loges also became impatient and frowned. "You're making me wait for nothing." A loud voice called out, "Prepare." Gisline per diem held his hand forward casually. "You know I'm older than you. If I attack first, it would be kind of weird, right?" Kane Loges looked confused as he held his sword. "What?" Gisline slowly drew his sword from the sheath on his hip. The sharp blade swung in the air. Gisline per diem confidently held his sword forward. He said coldly to Kane Loges, "Come at me." He looked at him, putting on a show, and was speechless. Suddenly, Kane Loges sat down, still clutching his sword, and said, "Don't you think it's too late to act like a grown-up now?" A loud voice called out, "Begin." Immediately, Kane Loges left his position. He jumped into the air, raising his sword to attack from above. His blade was very sharp, but Gisline per diem had also raised his sword to block. The weight of Kane Loges' sword was much heavier than Gisline expected. He roared with delight, "You have humiliated yourself too much to save face." Kane Loges swung his sword, causing him to lose his balance and retreat. Then Kane Loges stabbed his large sword towards Gisline per diem. He quickly dodged. He used his own weight to increase the power of his attack. His sword slammed into the ground, creating a huge explosion. Gisline per diem deftly avoided it. A large crater appeared on the ground. The two of them stood firmly, facing each other. The audience kept shouting, as expected of young Master Kane, "He can't even withstand another blow." Kane Loges smiled with satisfaction, looking at him. Gisline per diem calmly faced him. "Look at him." Outside, the only people supporting Gisline per diem were very worried while observing. Belinda gasped in shock, "What should we do, young lady? We have to stop them right now." Elena frowned, saying nothing. The cloaked man was happy that his plan was going smoothly. "It's too late. No matter who the opponent is, the moment they point their sword at Kane, they've already fallen into the trap." He kept thinking about Kane Loges' attacks. The opponent will be overwhelmed by that massive power. They'll think they can't counter it, and they'll exhaust themselves in the fight. Finally, when the opponent is exhausted from dodging, they'll show an opening and die. Kane Loges continuously attacked. Gisline per diem continuously avoided his blades. Kane always wins like this. He smiled gleefully while attacking, saying to Gisline, "You're quite agile. It seems like your skills have improved." Kane Loges threw his sword out and praised him. "Good job." He then grabbed his sword again and held it tight. He continued to attack while taunting Gisline per diem, "You've always been good at running away since before." Kane Loges swung his arm and slashed down, and Gisline per diem brought his sword to block. Kane Loges' blade caught onto his body. He exerted force, throwing him high into the air. The audience was shocked, unable to believe what they had just seen. Ricardo shouted in worry, "Young master!" The cloaked man laughed gleefully. "It's over, Gisline. Die." Gisline per diem was falling freely through the air. The cheers grew louder, and Cain Loges continued to prepare for his next attack. Gisline per diem, preparing to land, said, "I wanted to take it easy on you." He could still land gently, but he had gone too far. Gisline per diem, with sharp eyes, used the momentum of his landing to charge quickly towards Cain Loges. Cain Loges, shocked, didn't know what to do. A very sharp blade sliced his side before he could even understand what was happening. Cain Loges was shocked and turned his head to look. The cloaked man gritted his teeth angrily. He regained his balance by focusing his mana on his legs. Gisline per diem landed, breathing out. He turned to face Cain Loges, saying arrogantly, "You are an arrogant swordsman. You must have thought you were the strongest because your opponents would be afraid when you show off a little strength, right?" Gisline gripped his sword tightly with determination. "Let me open your eyes." Hearing those words made Cain Loges frown angrily. He turned around, swinging his sword and attacking him in a state of anger, yelling, "Oh yeah? How are you going to help me?" Gisline per diem focused his weight on one leg, lifting the other. He kicked Cain Loges's weapon hand. While he was angrily slashing down, Gisline took the opportunity to kick his hand to spin in the air. Gisline per diem slashed at him, then continued to spin gracefully to land. Cain Loges angrily roared, stabbing his sword forward. Gisline per diem easily avoided it with a dodge. Then he turned around and stepped directly on the sword extended toward him. His eyes were sharp as he swung his sword in response. His blade swept across Cain Loges's neck. Gisline calmly looked at him. Fresh blood sprayed from the wounds he had inflicted on him. The visitors who had been cheering excitedly also became silent. Everyone's eyes were wide open in shock. The noise continued after a pause. "What was that just now? Duke Gisline has improved a lot. Wait, is he really going to win? Damn it, I bet on young Master Cain." Elena proudly folded her arms, very proud of her brother. See? Scovin, despite his pain, also felt happy. The cloaked man looked shocked and angry. Cain Loges seemed stunned. "This wound, it's very shallow, even though he could have slashed deeper. Is he doing it on purpose?" he thought with fear. "How can a thug have such swordsmanship?" Gisline glanced at him, looking calm. Gisline per diem remained silent, seemingly thinking about something. He threw his sword, and Cain Loges was confused. The sword spun a few times on the arena floor, and he said, "A difference in skill like this isn't interesting." Gisline per diem looked at him with a hint of arrogance. "From now on, I'll fight with my bare hands." Cain Loges, feeling humiliated, was stunned. "What?" Gisline per diem replied, "Perhaps I should take this opportunity to teach you a lesson." Gisline per diem rolled up his sleeves, revealing a muscular arm. "With these hands." Cain Loges showed clear disdain when he heard Gisline per diem's words. "Educate me?" He rolled up his sleeves, saying softly, "Yes, you don't seem comfortable with my swordsmanship, so I will take the disadvantage and fight with my bare hands. You'll do better." His eyes became confident. "Instead, I will bet another 2,000 gold, double the original amount, on my victory." The audience was shocked by his words, and began to discuss, "With bare hands? 2,000 gold? This is a fight between the two of them." The cloaked man observed the situation, stunned, not expecting this. Sweat poured down his face, as he silently laughed. He dared to challenge Cain in a bare-handed duel. "I didn't think I would be grateful for his recklessness at this moment. Luck is still on our side." The host excitedly shouted, "All right, I'll add that bet for you. This will be a bare-handed duel. Young Master Gisline versus young Master Cain." The two of them were still on the arena floor. The people around them were still leaning towards Cain Loges. "All right, a bare-handed fight, huh? I'll bet more on Cain. Challenging that guy with strength is truly stupid." But this time, there were people who were starting to waver in their stance. Gisline per diem stood on the arena floor, very firm and confident. "I'll bet on young Master Gisline." Cain Loges grabbed his own collar, laughing ambiguously. He, with bare hands? You're making me laugh." His hand gripped the hilt of his sword. "All right, go ahead and fight without a weapon. I'll be using my sword." Cain Loges threw off his cloak. He rushed forward aggressively with his weapon. "And I will use my sword." Belinda outside shouted anxiously, "That's too much, young master. You should also draw your sword." He put a lot of power into his attack, and the blade slashed down sharply. Gisline per diem became more focused and sharp when he saw him act like that. As I thought, I need to slap some sense into him. Gisline per diem ducked down, avoiding the blade that was rushing towards him. When Cain Loges saw he missed, he continued to swing his sword at him. Gisline immediately stepped aside, dodging. His speed became extremely fast as he moved back and forth. Finally, to Cain Loges' surprise, he threw a punch straight into his inner thigh. Then Gisline per diem prepared another punch, coldly glaring at Kane Lodges. That powerful punch hit Kane Lodges' jaw and went upwards. He tilted his head back, spitting out blood. Kane Lodges landed on one knee, hitting the arena floor hard, and spit out the blood in annoyance. He couldn't believe it. He lowered his head and thought, what? How could his punch move so strangely? Gisline per diem stood firm, while Kane Lodges knelt on the ground. The audience everywhere cheered loudly. This is insane. Young Master Gisline can actually win this match. He glanced at Kane Lodges with a hint of disdain. Get up, I haven't even started yet. Kane Lodges, his mouth full of blood, gritted his teeth and looked up, growling in anger. He stomped his feet and rushed towards him again, his sword in hand. The very fast and sharp slashes were continuously thrown out, but Gisline per diem was able to avoid them easily. The moment he showed an opening, Gisline lunged forward and grabbed his weapon hand. Gisline per diem twisted Kane Lodges' arm in a circle. Then, he quickly kicked him sideways, catching him off guard. Kane Lodges cried out in pain. More blood spurted from his mouth. He was filled with resentment. I have to kill you to protect the future of the Lodges family. Gisline punched him straight in his right cheek. Another punch was delivered to the other side. He started to punch Kane Lodges' eyes repeatedly. He was almost defenseless, just standing still, taking the hits. The attacks continued to land on many different parts of his body. Then he punched his right cheek again. A blow so hard that his face swelled up. Then, he punched his left cheek to make it symmetrical. A direct punch to the teeth caused blood to spill. Gisline delivered another punch to Kane Lodges' left cheek. Next was a direct hit to the bridge of his nose. Gisline per diem went berserk, delivering a barrage of punches. Another punch was delivered to the right cheek. Then, a punch to the left cheek. Next were punches directly to the head, shoulders, chest, and middle of the face. He punched him in the neck. Then, he punched him in the middle of the mouth. The powerful attacks kept landing on Kane Lodges. He continued to punch him in the mouth. Then another punch to the cheek. Even when he held his hands up to block, the punches kept hitting him all over. His face was continuously changing, and Kane Lodges was being punched until his face was swollen, but he couldn't escape from that endless cycle. His face was disfigured. His eyes could not open. Blood constantly gushed from his nose and mouth, and his body was full of wounds and trembling. He thought bitterly, why? Gisline per diem grabbed his hair and lifted him up. He looked directly at Kane Lodges from above, saying, I feel sorry for your father. Kane Lodges looked up, confused. Currently, Kane Lodges was half kneeling at Gisline per diem's feet like a subordinate. He said loudly, Count Lodges helped per diem until it was on the verge of collapse, just because he was my father's friend. Gisline's eyes turned cold, looking at him. But in the end, his son had a different idea than his father. Kane Lodges' eyes widened with shock. At the Lodges residence, a few years ago, voices of opposition rose. Continuing to help per diem? Kane Lodges asked his father, confused, even if you are friends with Count per diem, we are also struggling. Why do you keep helping such a toxic land? It's no different than pouring water into a cracked bucket. The man had his back to him. You have only been back for less than a week, and you are already going to help per diem again. Kane Lodges looked annoyed, because he couldn't understand what his father was doing. He trembled slightly as he heard his son, Don't go, father. Kane Lodges continued to voice his confusion. Everyone tried to stop you. Why are you so stubborn about helping per diem? He turned his head and glanced at him, and then paused for a moment. Because we're friends. Kane Lodges' face, swollen terribly, looked silly as he recalled what his father said. Just that? Gisline per diem's fist was raised again, about to land on his distorted face. Kane Lodges, accepting his fate, closed his eyes to take the hit, but heard Gisline's words, This much is enough of a lesson, right? He was very surprised and tried to open his eyes through the pain to look at him. Gisline per diem held his hand out to Kane Lodges, and said casually, Get up. He looked at him silently, neither saying anything nor acting. Suddenly, Kane Lodges bowed his head, avoiding Gisline's gaze and hand. He hunched over in front of Gisline per diem and said, I truly lost. Everyone around was shocked at the current situation. Some visitors were staring with disbelief, and some were gnashing their teeth, upset about their lost bets. Even the cloaked man was speechless. The host announced, Young Master Gisline has won. The cheers and shouts of celebration began to ring out again. Some were happy, and some were sad. However, the festival atmosphere was very lively. I won my bet, I can't believe it. My money. Elena was overjoyed and shouted, My brother won. Scovin, Ricardo, and Belinda were also very happy about the outcome. The cloaked man, angry and out of control, stepped onto the arena floor and yelled, Kane, he shouted into Kane Lodges' ear, how could you admit defeat so quickly just because you were at a slight disadvantage? What are you doing? I trusted you. Kane Lodges stood up, turning away without facing him. Let it go. It's over. What? The cloaked man annoyedly grabbed his face, Damn it, this big kid. Gisline per diem, who had been witnessing everything from behind, spoke up, interrupting them. Now, he smiled freely, I have to do what I have to do, right? The cloaked man, confused, turned his head to look at Gisline. What? He suddenly said loudly to everyone around him, causing the atmosphere to explode. Everyone, pay attention. This man is volunteering to pay for all the food and drinks for everyone gathered here. The cloaked man shouted in shock. What? The audience everywhere cheered happily and enthusiastically. Food and drinks. It's been so long since we've had a feast like this. You're the best, my young master. The cloaked man angrily yelled in front of Gisline per diem. I don't admit that. Take back what you just announced right now. The moment Gisline put his hand on his shoulder, the man quieted down a bit. Gisline per diem said casually, this is the price for losing the duel. You have to at least do this much, right? And to be clear, that money doesn't include the bet money. He put more force into his hand, causing him a lot of pain. Remember to add 2,000 gold to the original bet of 1,000 gold. Gisline's face was as terrifying as a demon. If you dare to run away, you know the consequences. The cloaked man yelled in fear. Finally, the cloaked man sat down next to Cain Loges. Gisline turned and walked away after receiving his consent. I understand, I understand. The atmosphere in per diem suddenly became very bright. The next day, Gisline's room. A heavy sound was made when he placed a chest on the table. The shiny light from the gold coins dazzled Gisline as soon as he opened it. Oh my! Gisline per diem picked up a large handful. Considering how to use it, I can hire a small mercenary group with this money. This isn't a small amount. However, his face didn't look happy, but rather bored. He closed the chest. But it will take a long time to make more. They won't wait for me. To carry out my business plan, I have to prepare faster. Belinda and Elena happily stood next to Gisline per diem. He was stunned and turned his head. What's this? She said with anticipation. Brother, what are you going to do with that money? As if he had guessed his sister's intention, Gisline squinted. Do you want it? Elena put her hand to her cheek shyly. I was just asking. Belinda, standing next to him, seemed to understand his intention very well. It's very clear what he's going to use it for. Her eyes became sparkling and bright with dreams. Lady Amelia's birthday is coming up, isn't it? You're doing this because you want to buy her an expensive gift, right? She also praised him. You're so clever. Gisline per diem was silent, speechless. Elena looked at him with disdain. Oh my God, doing all that just to look better in the eyes of your fiancé? An awkward silence filled the air. Gisline per diem thought, confused. I have a fiancé? Gisline per diem turned to the two of them, looking very confused, and asked, I have a fiancé? Belinda glanced at him. You must be embarrassed, so you're pretending not to remember, right? Haha. Elena also sighed helplessly. It's Amelia from the Count Rayfold family. The unexpected information made Gisline freeze for a moment. He slowly remembered everything. Ah, that woman, Amelia Rayfold. A half-eaten apple, that looked perfect in the mirror, hinted at the two-faced nature of a problem. Gisline per diem contemplated her. A noble who is admired by everyone for her kindness and treatment of all, regardless of status. But later on, she will lead the rebellion and become known as the Witch of the North, and, along with Duke Delphine, she will sing a hymn of the downfall of per diem. Thinking of this, Gisline per diem's eyes flashed with anger. A traitor. He suddenly gave a sarcastic smile. Gisline exclaimed, a traitor. However, the other two didn't seem to hear him and calmly continued talking to each other. Belinda, when will father return? Him? Gisline per diem was lost in thought. Probably about a week more. He stood up and left. Belinda quickly and deliberately spoke loudly so that he could hear. A week? That's probably enough. I'll stop by the Rayfold territory. Gisline per diem paused, looking back at her. Wait, it's not her birthday yet. Why would you suddenly? Amelia Rayfold in a beautiful ball gown bent down to pick up a pair of shoes. A small spider crawled onto her lips as she was speaking. To get money. Everyone around was watching her sit in front of a little girl, who looked disheveled. One of the girl's eyes was swollen. She looked surprised and said, Ah, Miss Amelia. Amelia Rayfold looked very caring and said to the girl in front of her, if anyone has to walk barefoot in my city, it will only be me. She glanced at the soldiers behind her and repeated as if ordering, it will only be me. They immediately stood up straight and shouted, yes. The soldiers kept carrying boxes for the people around them. The voices of surprise and gratitude rang out. Oh, whoa. When she left with her soldiers, the villagers lined up neatly and shouted, thank you, thank you, thank you. In Amelia Rayfold's garden, Count Rayfold, Amelia Rayfold was sitting on a chair and her bodyguard was kneeling in front of her, washing her feet. Bernaf washed her feet very carefully. Then he looked up and said respectfully, you have worked hard, master. She put her hand up and caressed her beloved cat, sighing, Bernaf, father, my cat who is lying next to me is enjoying the caress of her head, always demanding absolute obedience from everyone. Then she raised her leg and stepped on his face, saying arrogantly, "How was your battle with the Northern Swordsman Master?" Bernaf didn't react, calmly replying as if it was an everyday occurrence, "Please forgive me, I'm just trying to limit any attention as much as possible. If I win, your actions will attract a lot of attention." He held her foot and tried to calm the situation. "It's not time to show our fangs yet." He kissed Amelia Rayfold's foot. Bernaf looked respectful. "My sword belongs to you." Amelia Rayfold replied emotionlessly, "Then, what have I raised you to be?" She put her hand on his chin, turning his face to face hers. Amelia Rayfold got close, saying magically, "Don't become weak." Then they changed the subject. "What about the trade guild? If it is the Actium Guild, you don't need to worry about it." He carefully recounted the situation. "They are busy buying materials to rebuild the monster forest outpost that was half destroyed by the orc attacks near Per Diem. In other words, we are taking all the support funds that Count Rayfold sends to Per Diem every year. Thinking about the soldiers," he continued, "we have also recruited all the soldiers and knights who left Per Diem. Many of the experienced soldiers trained by the barbarians are top-notch." Amelia Rayfold nodded in satisfaction and praised, "Good, continue to maintain the guise of a normal trade guild." Suddenly, their conversation was interrupted by a butler approaching. "Excuse me." Bernaf stepped in front of him, looking annoyed. "The mistress is resting. How dare you disturb her?" He lowered his head in fear. "There's a message from the gate, Sir Ghislaine Per Diem has arrived." Amelia Rayfold frowned unhappily. "Why is that nuisance here?" The butler was terrified, sweating profusely, and said with difficulty, "The thing is," both Amelia Rayfold and Bernaf were shocked by what the butler said next. "He has something he needs to discuss about the trade guild." In the reception room, Amelia Rayfold hugged her cat, sitting across from Ghislaine Per Diem. He placed his sword next to him and said politely, "Hello, Amelia." She and her cat both wrinkled their faces, looking annoyed with him. Amelia Rayfold stood up and complained, "It's very impolite for you to come without notice. Have you thrown away all the manners?" He was still sitting there smiling. "Your birthday is coming up, right? I planned to give you your gift early." Then, Ghislaine Per Diem placed a flower on the table and pushed it towards her. "I found this in a trade guild on the front lines. It smells very fragrant. I think I'll buy flowers there from now on." "What's that guild called?" He answered himself, "Oh, right, the Actium Guild." Amelia Rayfold silently glanced at and assessed Ghislaine. A moment later, she stood up pretending, "I don't understand what you're talking about at all." She hugged her cat, turned and said, "I'll take the gift. You can leave now, that's all." "Amelia Rayfold," Ghislaine Per Diem said in a low voice, looking at her. "Sit down." Amelia Rayfold flinched, looking scared. The teacup on the table also shook violently. "What is this pressure?" She anxiously paused and glanced at him. "Is this the same person who used to be awkward and stammer every time he stood in front of me?" Ghislaine Per Diem calmly picked up his teacup and drank. "I'll make this short. I need money. Give me 10,000 gold coins." Amelia Rayfold frowned. Confused, "Huh?" She turned around, looking annoyed. "You just show up out of nowhere and ask for money from your fiancé? Is this Count Per Diem's idea?" He lowered his head, contemplating, "It has nothing to do with him. Just give it to me." Ghislaine emptied his teacup, saying terrifyingly, "Besides, you don't plan to marry me anyway." Amelia Rayfold was shocked to be exposed. Ghislaine Per Diem smiled as if he understood everything. "It must be the night outside, right? Once you're in power, then you'll do as you please. But before that, if your secret plan to build an army for the Rayfold family's succession battle is revealed." The cat in her arms suddenly roared angrily. Ghislaine calmly looked at the cat, hearing her say, "Prince Ghislaine." Amelia Rayfold became serious. "Even if you're joking, you shouldn't say something like that." He replied mysteriously, "Don't worry, I will keep it a secret, as long as I don't have to leave empty-handed, that's all." Amelia Rayfold did not show any weakness and looked at him solemnly. "Never." The door immediately opened as she called out, "Bernaf." He held his sword and quickly moved into the reception room. Bernaf respectfully placed his hand on his chest, and leaned slightly. "It's been a while, Prince Ghislaine." Ghislaine Per Diem glanced at him, silently remembering, Bernaf, someone who always stood by Amelia's side. He gave him a very mysterious feeling. Even back then, his skills were on par with a northern swordsman master. Ghislaine Per Diem suddenly said in a low, threatening voice, "If I die here, a territorial war will break out. Can you handle it?" Amelia Rayfold looked calmly at Bernaf. "Answer him." Of course, a troublemaker suddenly broke in and was killed by a bodyguard. She held out her hand to emphasize her words. "The world will know it as such." Amelia Rayfold put her hand to her lips and ordered, "Kill him." Bernaf immediately became serious and drew his sword. "Yes." Ghislaine Per Diem silently calculated for a moment. "If you were planning to go that far, then..." A sinister smile suddenly appeared on his lips. I guess I have to get serious too, huh? Bernaf drew his sword, pointing it at Ghislaine per diem. He smiled as if victory was certain. Ghislaine was suddenly shocked when he noticed something. The soldiers in massive armor behind him began to move. One person inside that armor, with a face full of murderous intent, charged and attacked Ghislaine per diem from behind. The blade pierced straight through the chair. Ghislaine quickly did a flip on the ground to avoid this fatal attack. Ghislaine per diem put his hands on the ground, using the force to jump up and kick back at him. The soldier was immediately sent flying, crashing into the glass door with a loud bang. Amelia Rayfold and Bernaf watched this scene in shock. Ghislaine said with disdain, "Assassins," pretending to be polite and then launching sneak attacks. As he said that, he drew his sword and rushed towards them. This is a terrible way to treat a guest. His blade drew a beautiful arc in the air, clashing violently with Bernaf's sword. His eyes flashed with a cold glare. Does Rayfold not have any chivalry at all? Bernaf frowned in response. Excuse me, but the one who was being impolite first was Grand Duke Ghislaine. He barged in without a word, causing the young lady to be uncomfortable. With someone like that, he squeezed Ghislaine's blade with one hand and swung his sword forward with the other, shouting loudly, "There's no need to be polite." Although somewhat surprised by his action, Ghislaine simply turned to the side, dodging the attack. Then, taking advantage of his footing, he kicked Bernaf's sword arm hard. He was very shocked by Ghislaine's incredibly agile footwork. Bernaf had to retreat a great distance to avoid that kick. He began to fear Ghislaine per diem's incredible fighting strength. Grand Duke Ghislaine, I heard that you're just a useless person who likes to show off. The aura surrounding Ghislaine was tremendous, making him a little scared, but it seems that you're not exactly an amateur. Amelia Rayfold, who was observing from behind, looked displeased with him. She criticized him. What are you doing, Bernaf? Are you just going to let that thug? He looked back fearfully. Young lady? She frowned and ordered, quickly take his head for me. If you are truly my sword. Bernaf's face darkened as he thought. His sword was raised again. I will not disappoint you. Bernaf became serious and determined. Come on, bring it on. Ghislaine per diem said, looking at him with disdain. A bodyguard dares to order me around? Bernaf lowered his body, getting into his stance. I'm being lenient. But if you don't know your place. Both of them pointed their swords at each other. Bernaf seemed very arrogant. I will comply with your wishes. He rushed forward angrily, his face full of murderous intent, and slashed his sword. Ghislaine per diem was stunned and dumbfounded, because his speed was a bit too fast. He quickly moved to the side, causing the sword to barely graze his face. A small wound was cut on Ghislaine's cheek. That bastard is really fast. Bernaf rushed towards him again. The two of them kept clashing swords. He would strike, and Ghislaine would block, and vice versa. After several moves, Amelia Rayfold, on the outside, had become very impatient. Ghislaine, how can a thug like you fight evenly with a master like Bernaf? Her eyes flashed with anger. But still, Bernaf took advantage of an opening and stabbed his sword straight forward, making it difficult for Ghislaine per diem to block. The two swords continuously rubbed against each other, creating ear-splitting sounds. Ghislaine per diem spun around and attacked, slashing at Bernaf. His sword was about to stab into Bernaf's unprotected arm. He skillfully spun his arm in a circle, locking Ghislaine's blade, rendering him powerless. His other arm attacked again, and Ghislaine per diem spun away, dodging the sword. He looked displeased. That again? Ghislaine per diem jumped up, intending to kick Bernaf's arm again. However, before he could, Bernaf noticed his actions. Bernaf grabbed his sword arm and pulled it down. He frowned, looking determined. It won't work the second time. Bernaf swung his arm, slamming Ghislaine into the ground. His other arm swung high, preparing to strike. Ghislaine per diem landed on his back, very painfully. Ooh! Bernaf's sword was on its way to strike him down. Ghislaine per diem dodged to the side, using his foot to push away his sword. He spun and jumped back a distance. He raised his hand to his mouth, planning in his mind, as expected, you are using magic to strengthen yourself and withstand my moves. Bernaf, with two swords in hand, approached Ghislaine arrogantly. Grand Duke Ghislaine, you are very different from what I've heard. It's true that you can't know someone's true strength without fighting them. He threw Ghislaine's sword behind him. Your swordsmanship seems to have been honed through actual combat, not formal training. Did you learn from the barbarians since you fought with them so much? Ghislaine's sword hit the ground with a loud clang. That fighting style may be useful on a chaotic battlefield, but it's useless against me. His face was full of challenge. Your arrogance ends here. Ghislaine per diem, breathing heavily, looked exhausted. Yeah, he's a bit tough. He recalled his moves and calculated, those stabs with the narrow blades, those attacks aimed straight at the head make it difficult for me to grasp the distance and time. At close range, the difference in physical strength makes it difficult for me to use my technique to dominate him. Bernaf's aura was very strong. I knew from the beginning that he was not an easy opponent. Gisline per diem terrifyingly used his magic. I don't have much time. He clenched his fists as if holding an invisible sword and charged towards Bernaf. He seemed confused at what was happening. Magic. Bernaf felt something approaching from behind him. Here. Gisline per diem's sword turned around and hit Bernaf's back with the mana threads attached to the hilt. Gisline flew and pulled the sword towards himself, and blood spurted out from Bernaf's back. He kneed him straight in the face. Bernaf was shocked. What? What are you doing? Amelia Rayford shouted in shock. Bernaf. Gisline per diem, with his sword in hand, rushed down from above. He immediately reacted, using his sword to block Gisline's strike before it touched his face. Bernaf gritted his teeth and shouted, channeling his strength to resist the weight of Gisline's sword. He pushed his hand out, sending Gisline per diem flying back. He landed gently. Sensing that the situation was not good, Bernaf retreated, saying to Amelia Rayfold, who was hugging her cat, "Young lady, please leave this place. I can't guarantee your safety anymore." With his nose injured, he angrily pointed his sword forward. "From now on, I will use my full power." Gisline per diem, opposite him, was amused. "Yes, that's the way." He looked arrogantly at the two people in front of him. "It's been a while since I've met an interesting opponent like you." Amelia Rayfold, hugging her cat, picked up her skirt and ran. She was angry and distorted her face. "Gisline, how dare you humiliate me this much?" Running quickly down the endless hallway, Amelia Rayfold silently complained, "Who is it? What idiot leaked information about the trade guild to that crazy Gisline? If not, how could he know so much?" Her face gradually became twisted with anger. The rumors about him killing orcs, protecting his sister from assassins, and even defeating the heir of the Loges family. Based on his past, I thought he was just lucky or the rumors were being exaggerated, but how could this happen? Her eyes flashed with more anger than ever. "Damn it!" Amelia Rayfold ran to the corner of the hallway, looking around frantically. "What are my guards doing?" Immediately after she turned, Amelia Rayfold saw a person in a purple cloak standing there, surrounded by the bodies of her guards. The person in the purple cloak slowly turned her head, revealing her face. Belinda greeted her gently. "Oh, it's been a while, mistress," Amelia Rayfold said in shock. "The maid of per diem. Why are you?" She smiled at her, gesturing for her to be quiet. In a flash, she was behind Amelia Rayfold, her small dagger pressed against her neck. "Quiet now." Amelia Rayfold was shocked, not understanding why she was in this situation. Her eyes widened. "Huh?" Belinda threatened with one hand, and used the other to catch the spider that was always on her chin. "Oh my God, are you still keeping this disgusting spider on your lip?" Then she smiled threateningly. "I remember hearing a conversation between Count Rayfold and him, probably during the engagement ceremony." An image of children running away in panic as spiders swarmed them appeared. "Your siblings used to tease you about those terrible spiders, so you started raising them yourself for revenge." Belinda crushed the spider in her hand. "I don't know if you did that to overcome your trauma or to prove something." The poor spider's corpse was thrown to the floor. "Forgive me for saying this, but it doesn't suit you, mistress." Then she stepped on it decisively, and its blood splattered onto the bottom of her shoe. Seeing the spider's body under her feet, Belinda said in a threatening voice, "Can you cooperate obediently?" Inside the reception room, the situation was even more tense. The space was completely silent. Gisline per diem silently assessed the situation. "The atmosphere is really heavy." The mana surrounding Bernaf was enormous. He seemed to have become even more berserk. "The amount of power he's releasing is terrifying." Bernaf spoke up, breaking the silence. "An opponent worthy of entertainment?" He frowned and said to Gisline, "Only humble mercenaries say things like that, yet you dare to call yourself a noble like my mistress?" Gisline responded indifferently, "Of course I'm a noble. How can a simple bodyguard like you understand?" The space fell silent again. The two of them still had their swords pointed at each other. "Young Master Gisline." Immediately, Bernaf rushed towards him with his sword. He was filled with anger and kept stabbing with his sword, shouting, "Don't taint the dignity of the nobility." Gisline per diem was somewhat stunned by his fast and sudden attacks. However, he kept using his swordsmanship to block all of his strikes. Bernaf's blade seemed to have grazed his neck. Gisline had to dodge back and forth to avoid the dangerous attacks. "This guy." The tip of the sword drew a curve right in front of his face as he tried to dodge. Bernaf, taking advantage, attacked even more fiercely. Gisline per diem thought, "He's so skilled." He gripped his sword and swung it behind him, sighing, "Your attacks are very powerful." Bernaf continued to stab his sword directly at him. Drawing a beautiful arc in the air, Gisline slashed his sword at Bernaf's blade. The pressure bearing down on his sword shocked Bernaf. His sword struck down hard on Bernaf's sword. Bernaf spun his sword to block, and swung his sword back to retaliate. Gisline per diem was surprised at how bad the situation had become. He said, "Young Master Gisline." Bernaf raised his sword, his face full of rage, and continued to stab. "It's over." Gisline per diem raised his arm to block his sword. Blood spurted out from Gisline's body. A little blood even splattered on Bernaf's face, making him somewhat unbelievable. His sword had grazed Gisline per diem's arm. He's willing to be injured and use his shoulder to block the sword? In a flash, Gisline began to attack him back. Bernaf quickly regained his senses and continued to fight, frowning and saying, "It seems like I can't let my guard down for even a second." But, he spun his arm and pushed down on Gisline per diem's sword. Then he kicked him in his side. His face was very angry. "This is the difference between me and a person who only swings a sword for entertainment." Bernaf's strike sent Gisline per diem flying backward a great distance. He took a deep breath to regain his senses. Sweat soaked Gisline's face. He thought, this really is an entertaining fight. He had been constantly dodging and enduring his attacks. His speed, reach, and the power of his consecutive attacks were overwhelming. He's controlling the situation. Even if I try to close the distance to counter with close-range combat, it will be nullified. Gisline per diem thought about the times that they had fought, becoming helpless. When we crossed swords, he made it seem like our swords had become tangled together, tricking me into thinking they couldn't be separated. With my current mana, I can't withstand any more of those attacks. He stood still, watching Bernaf charge towards him with his sword. But that's only with the mana I had before. He gripped his sword with both hands. "Too bad, I have to end this fight now." Gisline pointed his weapon forward. "There's something you overlooked." His face suddenly became terrifying. "Some kind of magic is being used. It's my unique mana control technique." Gisline per diem immediately attacked, moving so fast that he was leaving after images. Third core, release. His hands were very firm as he clutched his sword and flew towards Bernaf. Mana surrounded his entire blade. Before Bernaf could stab him, Gisline per diem had raised his sword to block. The two swords kept crashing into each other. Gisline used his power to send Bernaf's sword flying. He was very shocked by his counterattack. Young Master Gisline. While he was still shocked, Gisline continued his attacks. "How can you release such a large amount of explosive mana?" The tip of the sword stopped right in the middle of Bernaf's forehead, his eyes wide in disbelief. Belinda had also brought Amelia Rayfold to witness this scene. She gritted her teeth angrily. "Stop. 10,000 gold? Take it and get out." Gisline per diem was almost exhausted. He glanced at her. "Humph. You spoilsport. Why didn't you do that when I asked politely?" His sword was returned to its sheath before Bernaf could even recover. Belinda teased, "Oh my, what kind of fighting is this between a married couple? It's all falling apart." "Young master." She looked at Gisline, who she was teasing, and he put his sword away. A little disagreement. Gisline per diem placed his long sword over his shoulder, and then walked up to her face to face. "I have some bad news for you, Amelia." His face was lifted up with arrogance. "The fee has just increased to 20,000 gold. Scattered along the corridor were the defeated. After the battle, the scene was desolate. Furniture was smashed, and people lay gasping for breath. The usually adorable white cat was now terrified, darting under a chair to hide. Suddenly, a vase was thrown down in front of it. It turned out that Amelia had smashed it. She looked furious at what had happened today. Her subordinate, Bernaf, stood there awaiting punishment. Suddenly, he spoke, his head bowed sincerely, apologizing to the young lady, saying the opponent was much stronger than rumored. It was his fault for not assessing the situation beforehand. In a flash, he had released an amount of mana that could overwhelm even a high-ranking knight. Amelia, upon hearing this, became even more enraged, casting a cold glare at her subordinate and saying, "You've changed a lot, Gisline per diem." Seeing his young lady's eyes turn red with anger, Bernaf asked, "Should we report this to Duke Delphine?" At his foolish question, Amelia slapped him hard across the face. She grabbed his collar, her eyes seeming to swallow him whole, and warned, "Watch your tongue. Do you know how terrifying Duke Delphine is? If today's incident is exposed, we will be executed immediately." She then released him, starting to think about how to deal with what had just happened. The reason she was secretly collaborating with Duke Delphine behind her father's back was because she had promised to support his rebellion in exchange for his cooperation in overthrowing Per Diem. If this was exposed, she would be killed by her own siblings. The more Amelia thought about it, the angrier she became, her eyes blazing as she said, "If the council knows all the secrets, they probably know about this deal too. No matter what, I must kill Gisline." Receiving the order from his young lady, Bernaf quickly responded, "Understood." Suddenly, she became concerned about Gisline's health. She turned to Bernaf and asked, "What's Gisline's condition?" He quickly replied, "He has wounds all over his body, and a large wound on his shoulder." Bernaf also reported what he had seen earlier about Gisline, that after summoning a burst of mana, his physical condition would be unstable in the near future. At this point, He looked seriously at Amelia. But, Barnaf continued, if we don't want to leave any trace, we can't use the knights of the territory. She naturally understood such matters and replied, I know. That's why I've been nurturing those brats for times like these. Seeming to understand his young lady's meaning, Barnaf hesitated. Could it be? He suddenly thought of a mysterious man, which made him look serious and even more menacing. You scum. Amelia paid no attention to his expression. She turned back to the table where a map was placed and said in a condescending tone, a seasoned warrior from the battlefield, without humanity, without a title, a special expert among those without clear identities, a killer for higher organization. She marked a point on the map, revealing her ill intentions, and ordered Barnaf, send those guys here. Choose about 18 who are proficient in mana. He looked at Amelia and couldn't help but shudder at her actions. Indeed. Her request immediately reminded him of the suitable location, a dark and narrow road. That small road was the only way from the Reborn territory to Per Diem. Although it was easy to hide in, it was the best place to handle the matter quietly and neatly. Barnaf's eyes flashed with determination. He looked at his young lady and said resolutely, I will prepare everything thoroughly. Amelia's rage had not subsided. Her plan for revenge was just beginning. She remembered what Ghislaine had done and cursed silently. You've made me endure such humiliation, and you will pay the price. The scene shifted to Ghislaine, who was busy bandaging his wounds. Suddenly feeling something, he thought, is it Amelia? Sitting across from him was Mr. Fergus. Seeing his young master showing a strange expression, he worriedly asked, Young master, are you all right? Upon hearing his question, he quickly replied, Don't worry, Lord, it's nothing important. He put his shirt back on and checked his wounds again. They weren't too deep, not too bad despite having overexerted himself. He then turned behind him, pausing in surprise. 20,000 gold received from Amelia is a large sum, enough to rebuild our territory. This is no different than saving a few years. Ghislaine began to remember the cruel Amelia, willing to spill blood on the battlefield, and sighed. It would have been better to kill Amelia. But it's hard to avoid a war over territory. I can't let my emotions endanger the territory. He put on his coat as he was lost in thought. Per Diem is at a dead end, even difficult to stop the invasion of the barbarians, so this is the best time to repel them. He adjusted his attire to look presentable and thought, knowing my secret dealings with the demonic council will make them wary and careful in their actions. Amelia. Ghislaine's eyes flashed with determination to defeat Amelia. His resolute look showed that this would be the decisive battle. This time, I will use you thoroughly. His tutor, Belinda, who had been sitting opposite him, also felt that something was strange. She suddenly asked, Everything happened as Master Doran said, right? Hearing her ask that, he quickly replied, Yes. Seeing his short response, she continued, They said if they heard fighting inside, they would restrain the guards. Then, Lady Amelia would come out, so capture her as a hostage. Ghislaine, upon hearing this, was stunned, a bit humorously saying, Oh, is that so? But I've assigned that task to Lord Fergus. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through his chest, making him stagger. He quickly covered his mouth and clutched his chest, collapsing. Old Fergus and Belinda rushed to his side in worry. He felt that something was wrong and said, Young Master Doran. Ghislaine coughed up blood, staining his hands. He was a bit surprised. The third time. And the core is still being destroyed? The situation is better than before, but it's going to be troublesome every time I use my power. I have to find a way to increase my mana. Before he could think anything through, Belinda forcefully grabbed his hand, surprising him. She held his wrist and checked his pulse, which confused him. Belinda. Belinda immediately recognized his condition. She took out a needle and said, The mana flow is completely chaotic. She directly pierced his hand with the needle, and a beam of light emitted. Ghislaine immediately realized that something was changing. Suddenly, a surge of pain rose in his chest, making it difficult to breathe. Ghislaine clutched his chest and coughed forcefully. But this time there was no blood. He stared at his hand in disbelief, looking utterly astonished. The mana pathway has been opened a little. If you don't understand mana, you can't do this treatment. This made him have a different view of the girl beside him. Ghislaine looked at her skeptically. Belinda, I heard my mother brought her back, so I thought she wasn't ordinary. He looked her over from head to toe and assessed, what is her special constitution? I don't know why someone with this much power would live in such a remote rural area. He suddenly remembered others who also had similar powers. The more strong people the territory has, the better. Those I have met so far are just the beginning. Lost in thought, he didn't realize how far his carriage had traveled. Seeing his lack of focus, Belinda spoke, Master Doran. She looked at him and said seriously, Because I trust Master Doran, whatever you do, I will always help unconditionally. So, please tell me, why did you take such a large sum of money from Lady Amelia? Hearing her question and seeing her serious attitude, he couldn't help but answer. However, It remained silent for a moment before speaking. I need the money, and besides Amelia, there is no one around here who is rich enough. Giseline's casual answer left both people in the carriage speechless. It was an unexpected answer, shocking beyond words. They stared at their master, dumbfounded. Huh? Belinda couldn't accept his absurd reason and replied, No, I mean, we took such a risk just to borrow money, and that's the only reason? If this gets back to Earl Raypold, it will be a big deal. Despite her unhappy tone, Giseline seemed calm. He answered leisurely, It's okay, Amelia will never tell her father. Then, he looked at her with confidence and said, Do you trust me? Even though she couldn't accept his ridiculous reason, she still forced a smile because he was her master. Oh, yes, I guess so. Well, at least tell the person who helped you escape danger what you're going to use the money for, okay? He suddenly became silent for a long time. Then, he answered her question. The Beast Forest. With that answer, Giseline once again surprised Belinda. Her beautiful pink eyes widened in shock. A spine-chilling feeling filled the carriage. The atmosphere was tense as he stated his intention seriously to both of them. I will explore the Beast Forest. Old Fergus flinched upon hearing that. He quickly objected to this plan. Absolutely not, Master Doran. There have been many major exploration attempts since your great-grandfather's time. But, before he could finish his sentence, he asked seriously, Lord Fergus, what happened with the task I asked you about before entering the city? He was a bit flustered at his attitude, Master Doran. But no matter what, he still had to report everything. He hesitated for a moment. Then, he still answered his question. Yes, the person you want to find is indeed in the place you mentioned. But, are you sure it's him? What is his condition? Without hesitation, Giseline replied, As long as he is alive, that's enough. I'm going there right away. Hearing his intention, Belinda immediately stopped him. No, you have to go back to the territory. With your current physical condition, you can't wander around like this. In response to Belinda's concern about his health, he calmly asked her, Belinda, do you think that after Amelia was treated like that, they would leave us alone? As she seemed to understand his intention, she hummed in agreement. He concluded, Her personality will surely want to kill me to cover up loose ends. Hearing that, Belinda raised her voice. She confidently patted her hand and said firmly, Young master, I'm good at fighting. Mr. Fergus is also a knight. If necessary, I'll handle it quickly. Hearing this somewhat adorable answer, Giseline couldn't help but feel touched. He replied, You've reassured me, but that's not your role. Different fields, you know. He then looked into the distance, perhaps pondering something, and said, I need a pioneer who can rush into battle. I will go see that person. Soon, their carriage arrived at their destination. A wooden house quietly nestled in the woods. The group gathered in front of the house and knocked politely. Belinda, seeing it, said immediately, The family is truly, aren't they on the verge of collapse? Old Fergus scratched his head awkwardly. The address is definitely here. After a while, someone from inside opened the door. A thin, trembling hand. An old man with hair and beard covering his face, looking very disheveled. With a cold gaze and unfriendly demeanor, he asked, Who are you? As soon as they saw the old man's appearance, Giseline's group was incredibly surprised, their faces revealing their confusion. Giseline, on the other hand, was unusually calm. Belinda turned to him suspiciously and whispered, Young master, is the person you asked me to find really like that? A pioneer? He looks like he's about to die. Contrary to her suspicion, he confidently replied, No, we found the right person. The old man looked at them as if he were examining them and said nothing. Suddenly, he frowned and tried to close the door, saying some harsh words. Young nobleman, you're too idle, aren't you? Don't waste my time, get out of here. Seeing him about to close the door, Belinda stopped him. Oh, wait a minute. Before the door could be closed, Giseline suddenly spoke. I am the leader of the Ratatosk's mercenary group, Gillian. His words seemed to strike at the old man's heart, stirring up buried emotions. He glanced at him cautiously. Giseline reached out his hand in a friendly manner. I'm truly looking forward to meeting you. Hearing the name Gillian, those close to him couldn't help but be surprised. Everyone's eyes widened in shock. Fergus couldn't believe his own ears. The Ratatosk's mercenaries? The young man beside him was equally bewildered. Could it be? Indeed, it was none other than Gillian, a former captain of a powerful mercenary group renowned for its terrifying array of weapons. The Ratatosk's mercenaries, where only those proficient in nearly every type of weapon were accepted, though now disbanded, their bravery echoed throughout the nation. Every knight had heard of them, and their leader was none other than Gillian. He looked at Giseline's inviting attitude without much warmth, giving him a threatening glare. Immediately, he threw an axe towards him without hesitation. It was only by a hair's breadth that the axe missed, narrowly avoiding taking his life. Giseline's 3 bodyguards immediately realized that he was not easily negotiated with. They quickly switched to serious mode, recognizing the danger. Gillian exuded a terrifying bloodlust, capable of making people suffocate under the pressure. His voice was cold as ice as he said, "So, you know me?" As Gillian got closer to Gisline, the others quickly got into a battle-ready stance, standing in front of him to protect him. The old man, Gillian, glared at them menacingly and asked, "What's the matter?" Seeing this, Berlinda desperately urged him, "Step back, young master. His condition isn't normal." Facing the enraged Gillian, Gisline showed no fear, instead uttering a strange phrase, "Eternal punishment." Hearing that, Gillian's heart was once again thrown into turmoil. The words seemed to exert an invisible pressure on his mind. Seeing his reaction, Gisline affirmed confidently, "I know how to cure your daughter's incurable disease." This statement caused everyone present to turn their gazes towards him in astonishment. He looked at him and seriously asked, "Now, do you want to talk?" Hearing this, Gillian had no choice but to trust him. His daughter's condition was severe, a strange disease with symptoms of high fever, coughing up blood, and red spots blooming like petals. The incurable disease made the patient writhe in pain as if suffering a criminal's punishment, an eternal punishment. And Gillian's daughter was indeed suffering from that very disease, a disease that tormented her and made her scream incessantly. When they entered the house, the atmosphere was gloomy, with his daughter lying on a bed. Red spots had spread all over her body, and the pain made her writhe in agony. Gillian was completely helpless. He could only call out his daughter's name and embrace her to comfort her pain. Rachel. Fortunately, upon seeing the state of the girl's health, Gisline thought, "It's not too late." This scene reminded him of his past life. "In my previous life, I also tried to recruit Gillian, but he was already gone then." The image of Gillian's fate in his previous life flashed in his mind. A tall man collapsed beside his daughter. He thought, he committed suicide after his daughter's death, giving up everything. Returning to the present, Gisline looked around the house where the two of them lived. He couldn't help but feel sympathy and thought, looking at the state of this house, they must have used up all their wealth to treat the girl. All that's left are weapons? Rachel could barely endure the torment of the disease, screaming in agony, "Father, Father, I'm in so much pain. I want to die, please." Hearing his daughter's terrified words, Gillian hugged her as if he was going crazy. "Rachel." Gisline looked at the scene before him and quickly took off his coat. There was no time to hesitate. He had to treat her immediately. Suddenly, an arm stopped him, catching him off guard. It was Berlinda. She looked at him seriously and said, "Let's go back, young master." She glanced at Rachel, who was suffering in bed, and said, "I don't know what you intend to do, but this isn't a problem that can be solved with force. Even the priests can't cure it. They call it a divine punishment. What do you intend to do?" Contrary to her serious view of the problem, Gisline replied confidently, "I can cure it." That statement made her feel upset. She called out loudly, "Young master." He looked at her with certainty. "You said you trust me, remember?" His words struck a chord with her, causing her to fall silent. Indeed, she had said she would trust him unconditionally. He turned and handed Berlinda a piece of paper, saying, "Take this." He instructed her carefully, "Buy all the herbs listed here, don't miss anything." She looked at each of the herbs he had mentioned, feeling confused. Gisline, having lived many lives, understood more than anyone about the things he had experienced. For mercenaries who traveled from place to place, knowledge was the determining factor of survival. Eternal punishment, currently an incurable disease, would have a cure in the future. Gisline held the bag of herbs that he had asked Berlinda to buy, carefully examining each one to ensure their quality. He checked everything to assess the quality of the herbs. It was once a hot topic, because the method of preparation is quite simple. Thanks to that, I still remember it clearly. The problem is that it requires extremely expensive herbs. At this point, he took out a branch of radiant purple flowers, a flower called Fairy's Blessing. Finally, he began preparing the medicine. First, crushing the Fairy's Blessing and other herbs, placing them in a jar, then pouring in strong liquor. He poured everything into a container and shook it well until it was mixed. Just wait a bit. Gisline sat there, meticulously going through each step of making the medicine. In the final step, he added the remaining herbs and stirred them thoroughly. Soon, he had a bottle of medicine. He took it out and immediately handed it to Gillian, who was on the verge of despair. Seeing the bottle of medicine in his hand, Gillian couldn't help but be surprised. He simply handed it to him and said, "Give it to her to drink." He also chose to trust him, taking the medicine and gently pouring it into his daughter's mouth. Gillian cradled Rachel in his arms, hoping that she would truly recover as he fed her the medicine. All of his hope was pinned on that bottle of medicine. Fortunately, the medicine was truly effective. Rachel no longer screamed as she had initially. Her body temperature also gradually decreased. As soon as she drank the medicine, the red spots on her face and body gradually disappeared. Her condition was clearly much better than when they had first seen her. Everyone there was surprised by the miracle of the medicine, and even Gillian couldn't hide his emotions. Fergus, standing to one side, was also amazed. The red spots, Berlinda was also shocked, are fading. As if seizing the last strand of hope, seeing his daughter gradually falling asleep after days of agony, Gillian was overjoyed. Rachel, this medicine really, Ghislaine, standing beside the two of them, smiled gently. He sighed in relief. Indeed, it's very effective. Gillian looked at him with a mixture of respect and fear. How is it possible? Even divine power couldn't cure it. Hearing that, he calmly explained, the divine power of the priests is not omnipotent. It only helps to increase vitality and the ability to regenerate so that the body can fight disease. It's different from a method of treating the root cause. Hearing his explanation, Gillian, with trembling hands, stammered, So that means, he nearly embraced Ghislaine, as if grasping his last hope, can my daughter really recover? He looked at the father who was worried about his daughter and couldn't help but help. He replied, 1-2 months, she will definitely recover by then. Hearing his confident affirmation stunned him. Finally, there was a cure for his daughter. He was so overjoyed that he would do anything. The old man suddenly bowed to him. With a sincere tone he asked, What do you want from me? Surely you came here with a purpose. He hugged his tired body and said, But all I have left is this broken-down body. Gillian looked at him with resolute eyes and declared firmly, If you want me to be a dog, I will be a dog. If you want me to be a slave, I will be a slave. Seeing his will to save his daughter's life, achieving his goal of recruiting Gillian, he did not hesitate to answer, No, I don't need a slave. He reached out his hand to help him up, and said calmly, I need Gillian, the leader of the Ratatosk mercenary group. Gillian looked at Ghislaine's face, and noticed that he was drawn to his eyes, those eyes. The more he looked, the more respect he had for him, the eyes of someone who harbored a dream. Then Gillian decided to take action to show his sincerity. He stood up and took the axe from earlier. He cut off his long braided hair without hesitation. As soon as the hair fell to the floor, Gillian, the leader of the Ratatosk mercenary group, had truly returned. The group looked at him with surprised eyes, a green light emitting from him. Everyone there couldn't help but marvel. Ghislaine's retainers couldn't believe what they were seeing. No, impossible. A strong, muscular Gillian, resembling the legendary invincible figure, was standing right before them. The bloodlust emanating from him was chilling, causing them to simultaneously exclaim, He's completely different than before. Suddenly, he walked past them, causing him to turn around to see what he was planning to do. Gillian looked at him with cold eyes and asked, Besides these people, is there anyone else who is with you or will come here? Ghislaine also replied, No, it's just us. He chose a long spear and asked, Does anyone hate the young master? He also answered without hesitation, Yes, and there will be more. Hearing that, Gillian emanated an even stronger bloodlust, enveloping the entire house. He held the spear in his hand and whispered, then, without any movement, he jumped up and made a beautiful spin. He threw the spear through the wall of his own house, flying straight into the forest. He threw a long rope in the direction where the spear had flown. He held his stance and pulled hard. Immediately, something was caught on the rope. He jerked the rope back, pulling a person cloaked from head to toe, who had been following them since some point. Gillian squeezed his throat, causing him to scream in terror. He tightened his grip and coldly asked the follower, Who sent you? The follower, frightened, struggled to escape. How do you know? Gillian looked at Ghislaine, then cautiously asked for his opinion. What do you intend to do? He pondered for a moment, knowing who was behind this, and answered, I think I know who is behind this. Ghislaine slowly pulled out his sword and said, I don't want to take action today, but, before he could finish his sentence, and before his sword was even fully drawn, Gillian raised his hand to stop him, surprising him. He looked at him with certainty and said, I will handle it myself. After saying that, he quickly squeezed the neck of the follower. His scream echoed throughout the forest. With his bare hands, Gillian eliminated a human life. He bowed to him, causing everyone to respect him. Berlinda, who had been observing quietly from the beginning, couldn't help but shudder. She looked at Gillian with fear, and thought, without any hesitation, why did the young master recruit someone so dangerous? Gillian was now kneeling before Ghislaine, speaking respectfully, Great young master Ghislaine per diem. He looked at him with adoration, and declared to him, From now on, this Gillian's life is yours. With this event, he had truly recruited another formidable member to his team. He looked at him and thought, with this, I have obtained an important chess piece for the plan to rebuild the territory. Ghislaine also gave him a look of determination. Eyes full of dreams. I look forward to working with you, Gilliam. The scene shifts to a gloomy place, a rickety wooden house built on a swamp. A scouting party has been killed. A group of people wearing cloaks and masks gather in the house. One of them exclaims in surprise, "What? These idiots?" Another, with a small scar on his mouth, speaks up to calm them. Silence. He is a member of the Viego Claw Gang. He sits there with authority. "Keep your voices down." The others who were speaking loudly become quiet, apologizing. "Sorry, Captain." Viego Villanos sits there accusingly. According to Bernarf's information, with the current strength of young Master Ghislaine, not only would they not be able to kill them, they wouldn't even be able to find the scouting party. Was it the incompetence of the scouting party, or was the information wrong? One of his subordinates steps forward, stuttering, that. He bravely says, "It seems that Jillian has joined his group." Villanos's lips curl slightly downwards, his face looking darker through the mask. He quickly grabs the other man's neck. Villanos tightens his grip, his eyes wide as he glares at him. "Really?" The subordinate, with his throat being squeezed, trembles in fear. "Yes, I saw it with my own eyes." He stares ahead with bloodlust. "Jillian, you've finally made a move." The scene changes to another location where Jillian is driving a horse-drawn carriage. Inside, Belinda is complaining. Feeling bored, it's too cramped. Inside the carriage, she is surrounded by a pile of weapons, and across from her is Per Diem sitting with her. This uncle isn't a merchant. 1 or 2 swords or axes would be enough. Why do we have to bring all this clutter? And because of it, we had to buy another carriage. Per Diem says, sounding like he is enjoying himself. "Anyway, we need a carriage to bring Rachel back comfortably." Belinda doesn't want to talk looking at him. On a certain road, there is a red carriage of Fergus's support team, Ricardo. Per Diem looks outside. "Everything will be useful, so let's be patient." In the dark, silent forest, their carriage continues to roll on. Belinda looks at him inquisitively. "Young master, about the guy we captured earlier. The one who was following us. He was definitely sent by Lady Amelia, right?" Per Diem wants to avoid the question, giving a vague answer. "Almost certainly." She frowns, sweating a little. It might be a bit troublesome. Belinda remembers the appearance of the Claw Gang members. The masks they wear are the symbol of the Claw Gang, one of the powerful gangs in Rayfold. Master Doran ponders for a moment. "The Claw Gang, huh?" Belinda recounts the dirty deeds of the gang. There isn't any dirty action that they don't do. Smuggling, assassinations, everything. They are filthy scum, specializing in drug and human trafficking. She says seriously, "They do all sorts of filthy things. Many of them are skilled former mercenaries, a dark gang with a lot of force." Per Diem is surprised by the amount of information she has. "Belinda, you only stayed in the castle. How do you know all this?" She looks a bit guilty. Sweat trickling down. "Well, before entering the castle, I was a bit..." Belinda feels it hard to talk, not daring to look him in the eye, and skips it trying to change the subject. Anyway, they're like leeches, so be careful." Per Diem slightly smirks. Master Doran gently comforts her. "It will be fine." Belinda turns to where the voice is coming from. Per Diem looks at the person who is driving the carriage with a face of assurance and trust because Gillian is there. Their carriage continues to move, deeper and deeper into the forest. Suddenly, 2 mounds of dirt rise from the road they just passed. From these 2 things, they catch up with the caravan as quick as lightning, surrounding it. Gillian senses something is unusual, glancing to the side. At the same time, 2 people in cloaks and masks fly at super speed towards him. Gillian looks very confident, pulling out a small sword with one hand, and holding the axe tightly behind his back, attacking from the ground. "Huh?" Gillian quickly parries both attacks from the 2 assassins. The sound of swords clashing and the sound of axe meeting sword ring out. He decisively chops off one person's arm with his axe. Then Gillian flicks the axe. In a flash, another person falls to the ground. The 2 assassins are now just bloodied corpses, falling hard to the ground. One after another, 2 more assassins swing down from the trees, all cutting their ropes simultaneously. A cloud of dust falls down from above onto Per Diem's carriage. Gillian looks up in surprise and yells, "Trap!" Belinda looks outside, also terrified, her eyes wide in shock. "We're going to be buried." The horses are also startled by the loud noise. Gillian tries to pull the reins to stop the horses. With a loud thud, the giant trap falls in front of them. Fortunately, thanks to him, there are no casualties. Per Diem sits calmly inside the carriage. Indeed, an ambush. A group of people in cloaks and masks, holding weapons, stand surrounding the carriage. The leader of the Claw Gang, Viego Villanos, speaks up, former captain of the Ratatosk's mercenaries, Gillian. Hearing his name, Gillian glances over, looking confused. Villanos slowly approaches, pulling out a knife from his hip, a coward who disbanded his entire mercenary group because of his daughter. Gillian jumps down from the carriage. "I don't know what you're talking about." A group of people approach him aggressively. "Because of you, my life was ruined. Have you gotten so old that you've forgotten your former members?" He doesn't move, standing still and looking at them. Seeing that, He smirks contemptuously, humph, pretending you don't know? I'll help you remember. Villanos yells out an order, kill him. The assistants behind him rush forward. Perdiem pokes his head out from the carriage. Do you need my help? Gillian stands with his back turned, confidently replying, no need, it seems he has something with me, so young master, please rest, I'm enough. At the same time, a series of knives are pointed directly at him. Gillian raises his axe. A loud noise erupts, followed by a cloud of dust. He swings his axe, and the other's hands are severed. Blood sprays everywhere. That old man, how dare you? Others also rush forward. Gillian pulls out the small knife from his hip. He turns smoothly, parrying with the knife in one hand, and swinging his axe with the other. He rhythmically takes down each one after another. Some lose their hands, and some are unlucky enough to be hit on the head. Every time he turns, he blocks an attack. Gillian chops his axe down hard. One person's arm falls off. Villanos stands outside, silently assessing. Indeed, his strength from when he was a mercenary is still there, but, he yells, each team spread out and surround him. The others do as they are told, forming a circle. Gillian climbs onto his horse, calmly responding, humph. The subordinates who are rushing forward stop in surprise. The horse? He rides the horse and grabs the big axe below him. The two sides rush towards each other. One enemy against thousands. Gillian takes a running start, throws the axe behind him, and aims straight at his target. He flicks the axe up, and a group of the enemy's vanguard are badly injured. Those behind them, seeing this, turn pale and stop abruptly. Ugh, we can't get close. You idiots, aim for the horse. The more he fights, the more excited he gets, the force of his axe becoming stronger. With one swing, another group is cut in half. Belinda and Perdiem, sitting in the carriage, witness everything. Suddenly, someone appears out of nowhere from above, diving down straight towards him. Gillian is not one to be outdone, raising his shield. The assassin falls, crashing straight into his shield. You, having ruined other people's lives, at least don't stand in my way. Villanos looks at him with resentment. I will kill you. He leaps up and throws knives at the horse. Immediately, it collapses, causing Gillian to fly backwards. He quickly grabs his knife and runs towards him. Gillian reacts quickly, blocking the fatal blow. I am not the captain of the Ratatosk's mercenaries. He throws the knife away with his shield. Villanos' eyes widen, turning back to look in surprise. He is thrown far away. Villanos slowly stands up. Former captain? He grinds his teeth in anger. Stop talking nonsense. If it's not you, then who is it? Gillian grips his axe. A green light bursts out. I have given up my past. He looks at him seriously. Now, I am just a subordinate of great young master Giselle. Villanos becomes more agitated as he listens, clenching his teeth and glaring at the person before him with hatred. You. Under the quiet, dark night, the sounds of weapons clashing and the noise from the intense battle were particularly clear. Diego Villanos launched a series of attacks at Gillian, each strike a deadly move aimed at a vital spot. However, Gillian was no ordinary opponent. He used his shield with quick hands and sharp eyes, blocking each of his opponent's lightning-fast attacks. Diego Villanos gritted his teeth, furiously stabbing his knives into Gillian's shield. Gillian, in his defensive stance, used one hand to lift the shield, avoiding the deadly blows of his opponent. Villanos' sharp knife pierced the thick shield. Diego Villanos suddenly spoke, his tone full of discontent. When you left, the mercenary legion also collapsed. Gillian paused for a moment. Then he heard Diego Villanos continue to say in a resentful tone full of anger, because of you, I lost my purpose in life and lived a miserable existence just to survive. Gillian listened to the lament, his face expressionless, remaining silent. The two continued to grapple in silence. A moment later, Diego Villanos pulled his dagger back from the shield. Gillian quickly pulled his shield back, turning to swing his axe with his other hand. He didn't give his opponent time to react, swinging the axe sharply forward. Villanos didn't give in, lowering himself to dodge the fatal blow. He remained in that position, then suddenly counterattacked. A reverse kick aimed directly at Gillian's face. Gillian reacted quickly, using his shield to block the surprise attack. Diego Villanos' kick was extremely powerful. The proof of this was in Gillian's shield shattering after blocking the attack. Gillian looked down at his shield, surprised by the destructive force. He muttered to himself, that shield? Villanos suddenly spoke, calling out in a deep voice, Gillian, I was willing to dedicate my whole life to the mercenary legion with everything I had. He stood up abruptly, looking directly at Gillian and questioning, yet you threw it all away to be a servant to a corrupt nobleman? Diego Villanos' eyes turned bloodshot. He pulled out a few throwing knives, staring intently at the person in front of him, gritting his teeth as he enunciated each word, I cannot forgive that. In the next second, Villanos hurled the throwing knives directly at Gillian. Gillian, Using his superior skills, calmly spun his axe in a circle, deflecting the throwing knives. The deflected throwing knives fell, embedding themselves deep into the ground. Diego Villanos had no intention of letting Jillian rest, even for a moment. He pounced forward, brandishing his dagger, intending to ambush Jillian. A strike came down straight where Jillian had been standing. Fortunately, he reacted quickly, easily stepping back, escaping the deadly blow. But Villanos's attack was not limited to that. Just as it seemed that he would fall backwards, he skillfully spun in mid-air, once again aiming his blade directly at Jillian. He used his axe to block the attack. Villanos's face was full of crazed excitement. He grinned widely. Jillian. He launched each attack with relentless determination. Villanos thought confidently, no matter how strong you are, that was many years ago when you were still the captain of the mercenaries. Villanos dodged the attack, suddenly appearing behind Jillian. He thought to himself, while you were worried about treating your daughter, I have become stronger through countless battles. Villanos stabbed his knife into the ground, landing right where the throwing knives had been deflected earlier. He looked at Jillian's back, stating definitively, "You are no match for me." Diego Villanos spun and kicked the throwing knives up. The throwing knives flew quickly, aiming straight at Jillian's back. Jillian directly used his arm to block them. 3 throwing knives embedded themselves into his armor. Diego Villanos had just launched his previous attack. In a flash, he jumped up, pouncing forward, aiming to attack once again. Jillian swung his axe, attempting to slash at his path. Villanos spun in mid-air, avoiding his counterattack. Diego Villanos, as quick as lightning, jumped behind Jillian, swinging his knife up, yelling, "It's over, Jillian." The knife stabbed down, a loud thud resounding. It seemed that Jillian had completely surrendered, but no, he had caught the knife with his bare hand. A blue monolight enveloped his body. Jillian, at this point, finally asked, "So that's why you want to get revenge on me?" Diego Villanos was shocked and stunned. A series of questions flooded his mind. He surrounded his arm in mana? Up to now, he hasn't been using all of his power? A blow aimed directly at his face, Jillian gaining the upper hand and dealt him a stunning punch. With a loud thud, Diego Villanos was knocked back by Jillian, crashing into a nearby tree. A deep dent immediately appeared on the tree. Dust flew everywhere. Villanos struggled to his knees, clutching his face and coughing. Jillian slowly approached him, saying, "I don't understand." Jillian held Villanos's weapon in his hand, and continued, "If you intended to get revenge, you had so many opportunities." One thing he found difficult to understand, and Jillian asked, "Why didn't you come to kill me sooner?" Villanos suddenly smiled like a madman. "You don't know the whole story." Jillian was startled in surprise. He lowered his head, recounting in a low voice, "I went to your house, but the captain of the Ratatosk Mercenary Legion wasn't there." Diego Villanos's memories were clear of that moment, when Jillian, the man he respected, was collapsed and motionless. He wailed, and only an old man who wasn't worth taking his life was there. Villanos could not accept this truth. He angrily growled, "Where has the Jillian that I once idolized gone?" Jillian listened in silence as he poured out his resentment and anger. He remained serious, without replying. After a moment, he threw the short sword in front of Villanos and spoke, "Listen." Jillian drew his own sword, and continued slowly, "I'm also just a man being manipulated by others," but at this moment, Jillian raised his sword high. He shouted, "I will give my old comrade the greatest honor." Jillian's eyes were sharp. His pupils flashed with determination and solemnity. He said in a deep voice, "As the commander of the Ratatosk Mercenary Legion." Diego Villanos was stunned for a moment, and replied softly, "That's right." He mustered all his strength and stood up, rushing towards Jillian. Now, this was the real battle. The two sides fought. The sound of weapons clashing against each other rang out. Diego Villanos was able to fight with all his might again, shouting excitedly, "This is the moment I've been longing for." Jillian also didn't hold back his abilities any longer. He fought with all his might, as an act of respect to his opponent. The two sides clashed repeatedly. Villanos attacked once, and he countered once. Neither side had any intention of giving way to the other. Diego Villanos used his flexible body to launch strange attacks. He used both his hands and feet to attack. Jillian was also not someone to be trifled with, easily reacting in time, raising his axe to block. He immediately seized the opportunity to land the decisive blow. In Villanos's astonished gaze, Jillian stabbed his sword deep into his side. Immediately, Villanos coughed out blood in pain. Jillian decisively pulled the sword back and retracted his stance. Villanos immediately staggered. This time, he could not dodge anymore. Jillian swung his axe directly down. Jillian said his farewell to his old comrade, "I will remember you. The captain of the 5th Squad of the Ratatosk Mercenary Legion." Jillian solemnly repeated his name, Diego Villanos. In his last moments, Diego Villanos was finally able to show a genuine smile. full of satisfaction. Blood splattered out. He was finally able to leave in peace. Valanos's blood-stained body lay motionless on the ground. Gillian stepped forward, picking up his short sword. He stood silently before Valanos's cold body for a long time. A voice broke the strange, mournful atmosphere. "Well done." Belinda and Ghislaine per diem stepped forward. Belinda looked around and exclaimed, "Hey, if we sell all of the equipment here, we will make a fortune." Gillian sheathed his sword, bowing respectfully to apologize. "I wasted unnecessary time. I am very sorry." Ghislaine smiled and replied, "It's fine." He looked intently at the man before him, thinking, "Gillian, he is even more extraordinary than I expected." He clearly remembered that, when he started to become a mercenary after leaving his home, the story about Gillian that he had heard from his superior helped him build the foundation of becoming a king of mercenaries. "Luckily, I acted quickly, so I was able to get such a reliable ally." Ghislaine asked, "Do you remember who he was?" Gillian raised the short sword in his hand, replying softly, "Yes." He gripped the sword tightly in his palm, saying quietly, "He was my old comrade." Ghislaine was surprised, muttering to himself, "An old comrade, huh?" Gillian's words triggered some thoughts in him. He suddenly thought about, "I wonder what my old comrades are doing. Before they met me, they were probably living their own lives." Ghislaine said to himself, "But one day, we will all return, right?" He brushed aside the emotions and thoughts that had just sprouted in his heart. "Okay, let's go collect valuable items like Belinda said, shall we?" Belinda immediately responded, "Great, now, Mr. Gillian, please lead the way, so we can quickly get to picking up the stuff, hey?" Gillian angrily interrupted, "I'm not your subordinate." The scene shifts to 2 days later, in the per diem territory. A crude carriage slowly travels on a deserted road. Ghislaine, Belinda, and Gillian are sitting in that carriage. They look around, observing their surroundings. Belinda smiles and says, "Phew, we're almost there." Gillian asks, "Is that per diem?" Ghislaine replied slowly, "Yes, it is." The moment he saw his hometown getting closer and closer, he suddenly thought, "It's good that I have a place to return to. I always thought I could come back when I left." Gillian examines the scenery in front of him, his eyes clearly showing concern. Ghislaine asked him, "Gillian, what do you think when you look at our territory?" Gillian, suddenly being asked, flinched, and stammered, "Yes, yes, it's very good." Clearly, he wasn't good at lying. Ghislaine easily recognized that. He spoke directly what he thought was in his mind. "Trash, huh?" Gillian shuddered, startled. Ghislaine remained calm, directly pointing out the bad points. "The houses are so old that they can't be repaired. Do you see those fields over there? That place has been abandoned. All those who could work have been sent to the army and forced to leave the land barren." Gillian hesitated, then spoke his feelings. "I heard that per diem has been constantly at war with the northern barbarians, but only seeing it with my own eyes did I realize that the situation is worse than I thought." Belinda, who was listening to the conversation, frowned, speechless, and thought, "Isn't this the territory that someone should know very well?" Ghislaine showed a serious and determined expression. Saying in a deep voice, "I will solve all those problems, so I need your help," he said to himself, "This will be a long battle, erasing everything related to Duke Delphine and fighting to protect what is obvious." Ghislaine looked into the distance, vowing that, "I will restore this land, no matter the cost." The carriage gradually moved into the street area of the city. Suddenly, Belinda exclaimed in panic, "Ah, young master, that's..." Ghislaine looked in the direction where Belinda was looking, recognizing who it was. He was surprised, his eyes wide open. A man with a solemn appearance was looking in their direction. Ghislaine was very surprised. "That person is father." Ghislaine stared in surprise. A thought suddenly popped into his head. That figure. He looked at the imposing middle-aged man sitting on a horse before the city gates. Father? Inside the castle at Castillo per diem, Swalter and the chief retainers of the family, along with Ghislaine, were gathered in the conference room. "We need to reduce our military strength." "What?" "Sir, if we reduce it further, we will have difficulty maintaining the front line. It would be better to request more aid from Rayfold." A plump old man said in a grave voice, "Rayfold is the one cutting off aid. Investigations have shown that they seem to be gathering troops and stocking up on food there." The long-haired man exclaimed in shock, "What?" As soon as that topic was brought up, the whole group started arguing again. Only Ghislaine remained silent, not interjecting a word. "There's no other way. We need to rebuild the outpost in the beast forest that was half destroyed in the last October battle. Even the night order will have to be reduced. Only then can we temporarily relieve some pressure." "But does Sir not think that reducing the troops will carry a major risk?" He looked at the chaotic scene before him with a solemn face and thought, "Everyone is still the same as ever, huh?" The long-haired man was Randolph, the commander of the per diem night order. The stern, bearded man was Albert, the chief treasurer of per diem. And the plump old man was Home Run, the chief steward of per diem. He looked at the familiar faces before him, feeling a pang of bitterness in his heart. How long has it been? Gisline remembered the image of his own body covered in scars from his previous life. For a Grand Duke of per diem, it had only been a few months, but for a king of mercenaries, it had been decades. That thought flashed through his mind. Then he suddenly spoke. This time on duty, you've worked hard. He looked directly at Swalter and called out, Father. The Earl of per diem, Swalter per diem, also Gisline's father, frowned slightly and asked, what is it? The atmosphere between father and son suddenly became tense. Gisline looked at him without saying a word, his mind racing with countless thoughts. When I was young, I hated my father because he was rigid and strict. A glint of light gradually appeared in his eyes. Now, I realize, the man in front of him had too many burdens. It was as if a pair of huge hands were pressing down on his shoulders, an immeasurable amount of fatigue and exhaustion that he had to bear, along with the responsibility of a lord. Swalter took a sip of tea and asked him, I heard that you left the city for about a week. Where did you go? Gisline looked at him seriously. I just returned from the Rayfold territory. Swalter asked again. And you didn't cause any trouble, did you? He took a sip of tea and replied calmly, I didn't cause any trouble. At this moment, Albert turned to look at him and said, Young master, although it's hard to believe, we heard you won in a fight against Cain and earned a sum of money. He frowned, implying, you didn't go to gamble, did you? Gisline silently retorted in his mind, gamble? If anything, I would have called it an investment, but on the surface, he calmly replied, no, I just had some things I needed to discuss with Amelia briefly. As soon as he finished speaking, the chief steward, Home Run, said, Young master, I must remind you again that before acting, you need to remember that you are the heir to per diem. Gisline closed his eyes and said vaguely, I understand, don't worry. His indifferent attitude immediately made him furious, but he didn't dare say anything. This damn brat, my words are like trash to him. How can I not worry? Swalter, seeing everyone turning to Gisline's affairs, spoke, Everyone, let's stop here. He turned to look at him and said sternly, I heard that in the near future, you've been causing this and that, haven't you? Gisline looked at him, confused. He calmly continued, I heard that you personally dealt with Jamal and Philip, those who tried to betray Elena, is that correct? As soon as he heard it, he remembered the two who had lured Elena before. Ah, those guys. Randolph, as soon as he heard this, resentfully taunted him. How could he handle it himself? They must have fought each other, and then the young master just finished them off, but the story got embroidered. As soon as he heard him, Gisline understood what he meant and thought, Knight Commander Randolph, even if they were traitors, the fact that a knight under his command was killed by me must not be easy for him to bear. Perhaps I should be clever and make him feel satisfied. And so he didn't bother to argue and replied, yes, that's roughly it. He was relieved to hear that and breathed a sigh of relief. Humph. That's what it was. Swalter, sitting next to him, looked at him speechless. However, the most unexpected words he received were the words of praise from his father, well done. He clasped his hands in front of his abdomen, looking serious but also very sincere as he said to him, no matter how the process was, the important thing is that Elena is still alive, isn't it? As soon as he finished speaking, the room fell silent. Gisline bowed his head and thought, this is the first time I have heard praise from my father. Then, he raised his head to look at him. Father, can I ask you for a favor? Swalter didn't hesitate, saying, speak. Before Gisline could say anything, Home Run frowned and spoke first. Young master, if this time you're going to ask for maintenance fees, I am telling you in advance, no. Randolph followed, unhappily interjecting, of course, the young master has done so many things. As soon as he mentioned the things he had done before, he became enraged and couldn't stop himself from ranting. Using military funds to gamble, then burning down the city gate because of a bad mood, even killing war horses to roast and eat, and saying that he needed to forge a legendary sword so he melted down all of the knight's armor. Even Gisline himself couldn't look him in the eye while listening to all this. There's too much. I'd just like you to give me permission. Permission? I'd like to pioneer the forest of beasts. Dad said no. He freaked out and started shouting at me. Of course he would. That place is filled with monsters. There's nothing to gain from dealing with it. Gillian, you've heard of my plan from Belinda, correct? Yes. I reckon you wanted to pioneer the forest of beasts with the funds you received from the Rayfold's daughter. The forest of death from which no one can return alive. Because of that, nothing is known about the place and everyone avoids it. Its notoriety is already well known in other regions as well. You know about it well. As you said, there's nothing to gain from entering that palace. But, shall we get started? Stop. Stop. You said you didn't get the permission, but you want to proceed anyway. But in the end, he smiled. It's not that I am asking for permission, it's just a formality. Anyway, This is something that must be done. As soon as he stepped outside, Belinda was stunned and questioned, "Why are you so obsessed with it?" He didn't pay much attention and replied, "That, I'll tell you later." He thought quietly, "If I reveal it now and rumors spread, it would be very troublesome. As long as I am successful in my plans, I will be able to make a huge fortune." In Gisline's mind, a scene flashed. A place not far from the entrance to the Beast Forest, where a huge runestone mine was buried. The mine emitted a brilliant blue light that nearly took up a large area. That type of stone was a mineral containing magical power, runestone. It was an extremely rare commodity that sorcerers went crazy for. With the power of this stone, it could be used for many things: different magical tools, barriers, magical circles, and spell scrolls. With it in their hands, alchemy, magical research, and many other fields, there wasn't anywhere where magical power wasn't used. At this point, the image of a man sitting on a throne appeared in his mind. In his previous life, the Delphine Duke family had discovered it. Now, only he was the only one who knew this information. Gisline thought about this and was filled with determination, his hands secretly clenching. Belinda saw him silent like that and anxiously looked at him. Finally, she had no choice but to compromise. "Yes, surely the young master has already planned everything." Gillian immediately said, "I will obey." Seeing that, he smiled slightly. "Good." Then, he turned and ordered her, "Belinda, go to the nearby territories and hire a group of mercenaries for me, about 200 people." Belinda sighed in confusion. "That's the money you risked your life for. Don't you have any intention of saving it all?" At this moment, Gillian suddenly spoke up to advise, "Are you sure about this, young master? Mercenaries are rude and reckless people. If you gather a large number like that, it will be difficult to control them. They might even turn on you and harm you. That's an obvious thing to expect." Gisline, of course, already knew that. He was very clear about the things that happened on this land. "That's right. So you and I will find the ones who are worth using ourselves. If they are useful." He turned, filled with confidence, and said to him, "Among the small mercenary groups in the north, there is one with very good skills." After a long moment, Gillian seemed to recognize the people that Gisline wanted to mention. He looked shocked and said, "No way. Those mad dogs." Mentioning the mad dogs, known for showing their teeth and claws, covered in blood, he grinned, his eyes full of danger. "They have good skills, but if they make a mistake, they are wild dogs that will bite anyone, including their masters, the Cerberus mercenaries." As soon as he said that, he and Gillian immediately set out together. "Let's go chain up those mad dogs." At the Cerberus mercenary camp outside the Zimbar territory, the figures of two people gradually appeared through the binoculars. The man who had just observed them smiled mockingly and said to the person next to him, "Hey, they're here." The other man lying down, covering his face with his hat, also said mockingly, "How pitiful, do they know where this is?" The man with the binoculars continued to observe, looking at their appearance, "They seem like a young nobleman. If we do this well, we might catch a good prey." Before he could finish gloating, a hand quickly reached out in front of his binoculars. A scream immediately attracted the attention of the people inside the camp. As soon as they looked over, they saw Gillian using one hand to grab the head of the man with the binoculars. He was screaming in pain, unable to resist. "You bastard, what are you doing?" Gillian didn't let him speak any further and directly lifted him up, then threw him hard at the stone, causing dust to fly up. None of the others stopped him. As soon as they saw that, the whole group turned red, glaring at Gillian. All the men wearing helmets were on alert, quickly surrounding him. "Who is that guy? Get ready to fight. Is he crazy?" At this moment, someone stepped out, looking like a high-ranking nobleman. Even if he's a nobleman, he can't act recklessly like this. A man wearing a scarf on his head, holding a spiked iron ball in his hand, bravely stepped out. He seemed to be someone with a lot of influence in the group. "You guys shouldn't think about leaving here alive." When he glanced over at Gisline sitting on the horse, he flinched slightly. He looked down at them with a cold look. "Quiet, who is the leader here?" The scene began to descend into a standoff. Gisline looked at the scarf-wearing man and repeated once again, "Who is in command here?" Hearing this, the man burst out laughing. "Ha ha ha." He held one end of a chain and started twirling the spiked ball in his hand, full of contempt. "It seems there's a crazy nobleman here." He twirled for a moment, then swung the ball up. "If you want to cause trouble, then you must be prepared to bear the consequences, right?" As soon as he finished speaking, the ball powerfully flew towards him. Gisline, without any fear, remained seated, ready to receive it. The ball didn't even reach him before it was stopped by a force. Gillian, from who knows when, stood in front of him. He had only used a dagger to pierce one of the chain links and stop the ball. The whole group was shocked at what they saw. The scarf-wearing man couldn't believe it and asked himself, he could pierce the middle of the chain link? The iron ball, no longer with any force behind it, fell to the ground. Gisline spoke again, "Indeed, they won't listen to what I say. He turned his head coldly and commanded, "Jillian, just do what you want, just don't kill them." He received the command, immediately releasing a thick aura of bloodlust as he replied, "Understood." Immediately after that, he used his strength to pull the sword that was still stuck in the chain link back towards him. The scarf-wearing man was pulled along by that force, and couldn't help but curse, "Damn dog." Gillian grabbed the chain and powerfully swung it once, immediately sending the scarf-wearing man flying up into the air. He skillfully controlled the chain, looping it behind his neck and lifting the spiked ball up. The ball, following the momentum, slammed into the stomach of the scarf-wearing man. The armored men quickly rushed to his rescue. "Damn, just because he thinks he's a nobleman, do they think we will just stand and take it?" Gillian quickly flicked the chain, wrapping it around one man's arm. He pulled the man closer with one hand, and used the other to punch the other man. After the collision, the whole group of men flew a few meters away. He glanced at the rest of the group. The entire group trembled under his terrifying aura and power. At this point, Gieslein finally stepped down from the horse. He walked calmly over, even finding fault with Jillian. "You're too slow. How long do you want me to wait?" After he finished speaking, he frowned coldly. "The soldiers, get them all out of the way. Call your leader out here." Finally, another man appeared. He spoke lazily. "I was sleeping peacefully when I was disturbed." As soon as the whole group saw him, they stood up straight, respectfully lined up on both sides. As he walked, he slowly introduced himself. "I am Kaur, the commander of the Cerberus mercenary group." He was a young man with bright red hair, long, narrow eyes full of laziness. He stood bravely in the middle of the crowd. He was the commander of the Cerberus mercenary group, Kaur. Gieslein, upon meeting the person he needed to meet, indifferently replied, "If someone comes to find a mercenary group, what else could it be but me coming to make a request?" Hearing that, Kaur asked back, "A request? What kind of person comes to make a request and ends up causing my men to be like this?" He looked at him unhappily. "If you are a nobleman, then you should know how to behave." Gieslein, not willing to be outdone, retorted, "Just consider this my way of greeting you. I think the best way is to force you to submit." Kaur seemed to have heard something funny. He chuckled softly. "Submit? You mean, if you greet twice, it means you want to fight?" They began to move to a tent inside the camp. Kaur sat across from him and said coldly, "Whatever, make your request. What grand request do you have?" At this moment, Gieslein finally spoke slowly. "The monster forest." He looked at him seriously. "I want to hire you to conquer the monster forest." The armored men, as soon as they heard that, began to murmur among themselves, "The monster forest? The forest that is full of monsters? Don't tell me, it's the forest bordering the Perdium family territory, right?" Hearing that, Kaur was quite curious about the person before him and softly spoke, "Who are you that dares to go to that dangerous forest?" At this point, he formally introduced himself. "I am Gieslein Perdium, Duke of the Perdium territory." Hearing that, he was slightly surprised. Then, the whole group began to laugh. "Hey, young man, don't be arrogant. That monster forest isn't a joke. Anyone who enters there loses their life." After laughing, Kaur looked at him mockingly. "Kid, it seems you are just a pampered young master who lives in luxury and knows nothing at all. I don't need to say any more." He waved his hand and announced, "The negotiation has failed." Immediately after that, the armored men began to get into defensive stances. Gieslein remained silent, not saying a word. Finally, he said something that made Kaur angry. "Humph, are you scared?" He smirked at him and sighed. "I heard that your mercenary group was skilled. Could it be that it was just exaggerated rumors?" Hearing this, he slammed his foot hard on the table. His expression became cold, as if his pride had been hurt, but he wasn't moved. "Don't be arrogant, kid. As you said, we are a mercenary group. Simply, if the price doesn't fit, then we don't take the job, that's all." Gieslein, seeing that it wasn't enough, continued to provoke him. The weak always make excuses. At this point, Kaur's mood had completely fallen to the bottom. He lazily leaned back. "Tired. You've ruined my mood. I was originally planning to have some fun with you, but now you're using such amateur provocation tricks. Someone like you, a child who knows nothing about how the world works, is not even worth fighting. I'll let you go, compensate for the damages and leave." Gieslein closed his eyes and denied, "No, it's not like that." He seriously looked at him and declared, "Kaur, commander of the Cerberus mercenary group, I challenge you to the Moriana recognition." As soon as he said that, everyone was shocked, including the armored men and Jillian. Kaur looked at him with a frown, asking, "Do you know what it means?" Gieslein looked at him with determination. "Of course, I know. A traditional duel between mercenaries, the Moriana recognition. Two mercenaries who are challenging each other will stand in the same circle. They will use the other hand to hold a weapon to attack. Once the duel is accepted, the two participants will fight with short daggers, without using magic, while their hands are tied together. Even if blood is shed or if their strength is exhausted, leaving the small circle surrounding the fight is considered a loss. It is a brutal survival battle within a limited space and limited movement. Both may fall because of it. There have been many cases where both the winner and the loser died. Gisline knew that, and he didn't hesitate to challenge Cower. The loser must admit defeat and absolutely obey the commands of the winner. In other words, the loser would become the winner's dog. Finally, he smiled with provocation. What do you think? At this point, even Jillian couldn't believe that he was taking such a risk. A noble duke resorting to the dirty rules of mercenaries? In the mercenary world, refusing this challenge was the same as admitting defeat, so he had no way to refuse this offer. As expected, Cower chuckled softly. After that, he began to laugh loudly and maniacally. This time, he could not hold back any longer. His eyes flashed with a dangerous light, and he ordered in a growling voice, "My brothers, it seems our noble duke wants to receive recognition in the style of a mercenary. So, we should gladly comply, right?" A moment later, their hands were tied together. Amid the cheers of the mercenaries, Gisline and Cower stood facing each other warily in the circle. Gillian frowned as he listened to the enthusiastic cheers of the mercenaries. "That arrogant nobleman will have to suffer. Commander, kill him." Inside the circle, Cower looked down on Gisline. "It seems that you have a few tricks up your sleeve and think that you can go against me without fear. But now, you can't back out even if you want to." As soon as he finished speaking, he pulled with all his strength. Gisline's entire body was pulled, making him stunned. Cower leaned close to his ear and whispered, "I've participated in this kind of fight 5 times and I've never lost." He looked at him with a mocking smile, without saying anything. A moment later, he softly asked, "5 times?" As soon as he finished speaking, he immediately used his strength to counter Cower's sudden pull, making his entire body lunge forward. He looked down arrogantly, saying coldly, "I've done this hundreds of times, did you know that?" Immediately after that, both of them seemed to be stimulated, with bloodlust continuously emanating. Gisline frowned and glared at Cower. He was also not to be outdone, his eyes full of danger. After exchanging a chilling look, both of them immediately swung their daggers and stabbed at each other. The deadly stabs were aimed directly at the face, but both quickly dodged. Gisline's eyes flashed as he glanced back. Cower was also slightly surprised by his quick reflexes. Both of them continued to slash horizontally, and again, they simultaneously dodged. He slashed, and Cower blocked. Cower slashed, and he blocked. The situation immediately fell into a stalemate, with neither side inferior to the other. He quickly stepped forward and slashed. Cower quickly jerked his arm, deflecting the slash. But he reacted very quickly, immediately spinning around and stabbing behind him towards Cower's flank. Cower was able to block it again. Then, Cower seized the opportunity to slash at his head from behind. Gisline quickly ducked, avoiding a fatal blow. When he turned around, both of them were back in a standoff. Suddenly, Cower didn't use his hand anymore, but instead, he brought up his leg. He kicked Gisline forcefully, and Gisline also used his knee to respond. However, Cower's strength was too great, and it seemed like his leg was injured. It was only at this point that Cower had time to open his mouth and speak. His foul mouth didn't spare anyone. "Oh, quite tenacious, aren't you? You said you tried doing this thing that people can only do once in their lifetime 100 times? If you're planning on showing off." As he stabbed, barely missing Gisline's ear, he yelled crazily, "You should say something that makes sense." Outside the circle, the soldiers were also furiously discussing, yelling loudly, "That nobleman has been suppressed by the commander's strength. Finish him off. This is the price he has to pay for daring to insult us." Gillian looked at the crowd with dissatisfaction. Even though he was alone, he could completely shut them up. He shifted his attention to the battle and carefully analyzed, "This is a disadvantageous battle." Gillian looked at the physical difference between the two people inside the tiny circle. The area of the fight was so small that even if one person were to lie down, it would be difficult. Under the rule that only the pure strength of the body could be used, without magic, the physical difference was obvious. Also, with their hands tied, their movements were limited. The young master can only barely evade or defend himself, but even so, they are still fighting on equal terms. He watched Cower easily grab Gisline's arm. With his larger physique, he could completely control and manipulate the situation. He paused for a moment, and a dangerous thought slowly flashed: if the young master falls into a dangerous situation. Gillian slowly wrapped his hand behind his back, touching the handle of his axe. Then, back to the battle, Cower was hooking Gisline's arm, pulling it out in front. He used the force to pull Gisline while simultaneously slashing in a wide area. Gisline immediately jumped high to dodge. When he landed, he had already moved behind him. However, he realized that the pain under his leg was secretly spreading. He lowered his eyes and thought, "The arm I used to block just now, it hurts too much. There's no magic to protect it." Even if I manage to block his stab from behind, the aftershock is still accumulating. Cower was getting more and more excited as he fought. He grinned smugly and yelled, "Look, your face is paling. Seems like you won't be able to hold on anymore, right?" He continuously attacked him. In his heart, he had a different opinion, but he was still extremely arrogant. "Gieslein per diem, seeing you try so hard to withstand my power is pitiful. Well, compared to the nobles I've met, you're kind of impressive, but only up to that point." His eyes seemed to have seen through everything. "Your intentions, I see through all of them." Gieslein dodged a slash with extreme speed. "Every time you swing your knife, I'll easily deflect or dodge it." Then, he kicked hard at his injured leg again. "Those lighter stabs of mine, you must be choosing to use your body to force yourself to endure them, right?" Cower had noticed his injured leg. However, this battle, according to the rules of Moriana, completely eliminated the support from magic. Even if you could block it, the aftershock would still accumulate on your body. Cower looked at his eyes that had glanced down at his injury, and felt extremely happy. "And by now you must have clearly felt the pressure on your leg, right? Your expression has given it all away." He showed a sinister smile. "Keep struggling." His eyes at this moment were like a hunter observing his prey, and the prey was none other than Gieslein. "That's why this is interesting." Cower spun his knife skillfully, then quickly rushed over. He pushed the blade behind him and swung his pure fist up. No matter how fast the punch was, Gieslein easily dodged it. But then, he aimed the blade down, stabbing back at his neck. But he raised his hand and blocked it. He took advantage of the situation to grab his arm and pull down. He was pulled by the momentum. Waiting for him was Cower's knee. Gieslein risked everything, using his injured calf to block it. The collision immediately resounded loudly. His calf also sent a sharp pain. Cower glanced down and said in a deep voice, "All right, this is the end." He raised the knife high, the tip pointed directly at his back. Without hesitation, he stabbed down. "Die." The soldiers immediately cheered. Gillian, seeing that, quickly drew his axe. "Young master, be careful." But unexpectedly, in this situation, Gieslein was still able to smile. He forcefully tilted his body to avoid the knife by a hair's breadth. His entire body went low, sliding diagonally. Cower could not believe it. "How could he dodge my stab from that position?" Gieslein, almost parallel to the ground, slashed out in a large arc. Cower's unguarded side was immediately slashed, spraying blood. He stared blankly at the large wound on his waist. The soldiers outside fell silent in surprise. Even Gillian was stunned, his eyes wide in disbelief. Cower angrily slashed wildly. Gieslein easily dodged. Following his horizontal slash, he tilted his body again, parallel to the ground. He swung his hand and slashed upwards, blood spraying from the wound on the left side of his chest. At this point, the whole group started to panic. "The commander has been slashed." Gillian quietly listened to the soldiers cheering. That nobleman, just now he was clearly being suppressed by the commander's power. "Commander, show him what true power is." But this time, his eyes were filled with shock. The battle was still going on. Cower quickly stabbed, but this time, his weakness was too big, giving Gieslein an opportunity to drive his shoulder into his chest. Then, he raised his bloody knife, and instead of stabbing with it, he used his fist to punch Cower repeatedly in the face and chest. Next, he turned the blade downwards. Without any hesitation, he stabbed it directly into the bicep that was tied together with his own, making him scream in pain. He was so angry that he couldn't think anymore and swung his knife wildly. Cower could not believe that he could be cornered to this extent. He gritted his teeth. "You." He looked at Gieslein's face, which was calm as if nothing had happened, and didn't understand why this was happening. Before, he was struggling to withstand my power, and now, what scheme is he playing? Gillian, after observing for a while, also realized, so that's it. He recalled his movements from before and thought, the act of transferring power so strongly makes the commander's muscles tense, and his body becomes less agile. Trying to suppress and take the initiative by using all of his strength ends up making him lose the necessary flexibility. The young master didn't confront his powerful aura directly, but chose to relax, skillfully turning the current into his advantage. Thinking about this, he took the axe off his back. It's unexpected that you can overcome the physical disadvantage this way. Cower was now swollen and panting like a pig. The soldiers behind him still didn't stop yelling, "Hey, Commander, what are you waiting for? If it keeps going like this, it will be boring." Gieslein, without a scratch except for his leg, coldly glanced at Cower and said, "Your will is truly tenacious, but in the past, there weren't few people who were forced into a corner and broke the rules, and resorted to magic." Cower, even though he was battered, still held on to his pride. "You talk as if you've actually experienced it 100 times. That commander title, you only got it thanks to the recognition of Moriana. If you dare break the rules, then there will be no place for you in this world." Hearing this, he smiled contentedly. Truly admirable. At this point, both of them standing in the circle paused for a moment. Cower looked at him and said, I admit, in a direct confrontation, I am slightly inferior, but, he became arrogant. His eyes rolled back, his pupils constricted, and he yelled, the conditions for deciding victory are not just one. As soon as he finished speaking, he immediately turned around, trying his best to throw Gisline away. He, following the momentum, was thrown into the air. Another rule of Moriana's recognition was, just by stepping out of the circle, even for one step, you are considered defeated. Cower looked at him slowly falling down, thinking that victory was in his grasp, and gloated inwardly, no matter how talented you are, once I throw you like this, you will soon hit the ground outside of the circle. His swollen face gradually showed a distorted smile. Victory belongs to me. However, his knife-wielding arm swung up. He used a posture of being suspended in the air to skillfully slide down the arm that was tied together. Gisline relied on the force of his arm to spin in the air in an unbelievable way. Finally, he swung his body parallel to the ground, using the force of the grip of his arm tied to Cower's hand, and kicked Cower's leg with tremendous force. The arms of the two of them clenched together in an instant. Gisline used his leg as a support and pulled Cower's arm powerfully. He quickly changed his position, looping his body behind him, using inertia to push him down. Finally, Gisline unleashed all his strength and pressed Cower's head hard into the ground. Immediately after that, the space suddenly became silent. After a long while, the soldiers began to speak hesitantly. He's outside the circle. Cower also could not believe that he had been defeated so badly. So, it's really over? Gisline looked down at him arrogantly. Victory belongs to me, Cower. Cower lay on the ground panting, asking in disbelief, what kind of person are you to possess such extraordinary strength? Gisline looked at him coldly, a dangerous light flashing in his eyes, and said in a deep voice, your attitude is not appropriate. In front of the person who will become the owner of this place, you dare to show such an attitude? Cower quickly jumped up and threw his hand away. He retorted unhappily, what? The fight is over, right? However, his answer immediately poured cold water on him. No, I haven't stepped out of the circle yet. Cower was shocked. What? He frowned and raised his fist. From now on, it will be time to teach you with the status of a subordinate. As soon as he finished speaking, he punched Cower in the face without any hesitation. The whole group looked on in surprise as he fell down, not understanding what was happening. He was still yelling wildly, hey, wait, according to the rules, stepping outside the ring is a violation. Gisline, not letting him continue, punched him again in the middle of his face. He sat on Cower and continued to raise his fist, asking coldly, are you planning on bringing up rules in the middle of the battlefield? Cower lay on the ground, unable to move, and could only yell, you dare call yourself a noble? Not receiving a satisfactory answer, he continued to punch him coldly. Don't object to what your master decides. As soon as he finished speaking, his fist slammed into his face again, and blood continued to spray out. The punches continued to fall like rain, all concentrated on the same spot on his face without missing a millimeter. Each punch seemed like it wanted to send him to the other side. The soldiers, seeing such a horrifying scene, did not dare to intervene. Hey, is it okay to just leave it like that? The bet has already ended. When he could not bear it anymore, Cower screamed for mercy. Stop. Gisline grabbed his hand and pulled him up. The ground below them had been dyed a bright red. He said coldly again, I still haven't stepped out of the ring yet. Cower's face was completely disfigured. He looked at his raised fist in fear. Finally, he chose to be a coward and turned his head to yell at his subordinates, are you just going to watch? Kill this man for me. The soldiers reacted, quickly grabbing their weapons and preparing to charge. Yes, sir. But before they could take a few steps, they were stopped by Jillian's axe. He released a thick aura of bloodlust and stared at them. From now on, anyone who dares to obstruct the young master will die. Seeing that, the whole group trembled and hesitated to step forward. Cower looked at his subordinates in despair. Then he froze, glancing to the side. In front of him was Gisline, who seemed like a demon demanding a life, saying, let's finish what we started. As soon as he finished speaking, his fist swung again. Cower was completely unable to resist. He could only use his face to bear the full force of his punches. Before falling down, a thought flashed through his mind. Those nobles, in the end, are just all cowards. The images flashed by like a movie reel in his mind. A fat nobleman like a pig squealing arrogantly. A goatee nobleman like a treacherous minister. And a woman like a narcissist. Before, they had all kneeled and begged before him. Just by intimidating them a little, they would immediately cower and beg for mercy. The dirty money would also fill his pockets. Robbing such people was a pleasure like no other. Cower, the leader of the Cerberus mercenary group, who once built a reputation with the famous nickname Mad Dog, now, I'm easily defeated in such a pathetic way. Why do I have to suffer such humiliation from a young, immature nobleman? The soldiers watched their leader fall unconscious and cried out loudly, but still, no one dared to step forward. Commander Cower, isn't he going to die? But what should we do? Gisline calmly picked up Cower's hand and thought, this is enough, isn't it? He turned to point at a few soldiers and ordered, what are you waiting for? Bring water, bandages, and a towel here. Hearing that, they did not react immediately and asked, what? He raised Cower's limp arm like a string of noodles and said coldly, are you planning on letting your commander die like this? Only at this point did the whole group finally realize it. Then, they quickly ran to prepare. Yes, I understand. Gillian, speechless, turned his head to look at Gisline. His eyes flashed with shock and disbelief, and he thought, those rebellious mercenaries are actually listening to the young master obediently? He watched them in disbelief as they were being led by the young master in front of them. His hand also clenched unconsciously. In the world of mercenaries, where the fist is stronger than the law, where a fierce wolf can make his enemies tremble like a dog, there, the young master has engraved in their minds with the most direct and effective method, that he is the one who is in charge. After successfully treating Cower, Gisline placed a piece of paper in front of him. He coldly pointed at it and ordered, sign your name. Cower, having experienced a life-or-death beating, did not dare say anything. He silently and obediently took the pen and signed his name. Even though he was dissatisfied, he did not have any more will to resist. After signing, he pushed the paper towards Gisline. Here. Gisline was unhappy with his tone and glared at him, asking back, here? Cower was afraid, not daring to look directly at him, sweating as he trembled and corrected his words, please take care of me. He chuckled lightly, good, then reached out and grabbed Cower's arm, making him groan in pain. Gisline acted like he was just shaking hands and said, from now on, we are one family. Let's do all things well. His eyes flashed with a sharpness not befitting of his age. A few days later, on the outskirts of the per diem territory, the mercenaries, fully armed, gathered in an open space. Two of them were sluggishly complaining to each other, oh God, why did they call for a gathering so early in the morning? I can't operate until after lunch. Another group gathered to discuss the employer who was hiring them. A bald man started a conversation. Have you heard? There's a rumor that the person hiring us is young master per diem. The others immediately chimed in, what? A young brat? I don't know if he's strong enough to manage a bunch of mercenaries like us. A one-eyed man silently listened to the mockery coming from the side, we just need to do a sloppy job, and we'll get a good profit. Suddenly, a muscular man clapped his hands and shouted, attracting everyone's attention, all right, listen up. Relying on his huge physique, he made a suggestion, if we want to easily handle a young, immature boss, we need a strong representative, right? The others seemed to recognize him. You're Muscular Gordon. He proudly showed off his body and introduced himself. That's right, I am Muscular Gordon. Today, I'm very impressed with your enthusiasm for discussing how to make a profit. However, if we don't agree, it will be hard to achieve the desired results. Hearing that, the others nodded in agreement. Thinking about it, last time, there was a fool who demanded too much, and everything fell apart. The bald man looked at Gordon and asked, so, what are we going to do this time? He smiled smugly and said, these things need to know when to stop. Doing too much will just ruin it. Gordon smiled cunningly and showed a bag of money. I will stand up as a representative, and pressure the boss, and the money, you can divide it among yourselves as you see fit, okay? Looking at the sparkling gold coins, no one could refuse. Agreed. If Gordon takes on the role of a decoy, then everything will definitely go smoothly. That large, clumsy body is actually very useful. We have our confidence. Gordon, you only exercise every day, but you're very good at smelling money. At this moment, someone shouted, making the group look around. Hey, someone's coming! From afar, only one person on a horse gradually appeared in their eyes. That person was Gisline. Seeing that, the whole group discussed amongst themselves, what's this? He's coming alone? Looking at his clothes, he seems like a big boss. Poor thing, I don't know if he'll run away after seeing Gordon's muscles. Gordon, being praised by the others, also became arrogant. All right, everyone, step forward and keep your momentum up. He smiled smugly and said, we have to let that innocent nobleman taste what life is like. Suddenly, he stared in surprise, making a strange sound. Huh? Behind Gisline, a large group of people gradually appeared. They were all known as infamous faces in the mercenary world, like Gillian and Cower, and a group of Cerberus members. A sharp-eyed person immediately recognized them. The dog-head helmets, is that the Cerberus mercenary group? Gordon, who was right next to him, was shocked and shouted, what? He didn't dare look at the Cerberus group acting so obedient. How can this be? What happened that those notoriously stubborn people are so obedient to the boss? After a while, the group finally arrived in front of Gordon's group. Gieslein indifferently glanced around. Finally, he chose Gordon and asked, "Are you the one in charge here?" He had lost all the arrogance he had shown before. He was now a cowering person. Stammering, "Why, yes, that's right." He asked coldly again, "What is your name?" He didn't dare to raise his head and replied, I am Muscular Gordon." Gieslein observed him for a moment, then repeated, "Muscular Gordon." After that, he raised his fist and gently punched him on the chest. That gentle punch made his entire body tremble. After he finished speaking, he looked seriously at Gordon's group and introduced, "I am the young master of Per Diem, Gieslein Per Diem." He turned and coldly commanded, "Gather all of your mercenaries here, Gordon." Gieslein glanced and said a shocking piece of information. "From now on, we will be exploring the Beast Forest." Inside the Beast Forest, everyone had set up camp. At this moment, Belinda was adjusting Gieslein's clothes. He silently allowed her to attach the armor to his chest. All preparations for exploring the forest were complete. Then came the armor on his arm, building temporary quarters for the expedition. Finally, she tied the knot on his back and provided supplies. Gieslein stood imposingly, looking at the hundreds of mercenaries gathered below, as well as the military force. Behind him were the three key people, Belinda, Jillian, and Cower. Gieslein glanced at Belinda and ordered, "Belinda, check the number of people again." She quickly replied, "Yes." She looked at Gordon's group. The mercenaries hired through the office totaled 148 people. Then she looked at the soldiers wearing the dog head helmets. The Cerberus mercenary group that the young master brought with him consists of 41 people. Including us, the total manpower is 192 people. After listening, he asked, "All right, have you spoken with Scoven?" Belinda, remembering his and Ricardo's assured expressions, calmly reported, "Yes. I thought he would object, but on the contrary, he proactively helped us hide the fact that we are going into the Beast Forest so we wouldn't be discovered. Anyway, his main job is to be in command of the base camp near the Beast Forest, so there's probably nothing to worry about." Gieslein, hearing that everything was going smoothly, grinned, "Good." Immediately after that, he ordered loudly, "Everyone, get into formation." He calmly pointed to the forest behind them and said, "Right before us is the Beast Forest, the place we will be exploring. You all must have heard the rumors. This place is full of unprecedented dangers." But his face was still full of determination. "All kinds of monsters, unknown threats, and even things beyond our imagination may be there. Even if we have to face those dangers, we must explore this place at all costs." The mercenaries outside, upon hearing that, were terrified and cried out, "What? The Beast Forest? Explore the forest? But wasn't it the Beast Forest? Is it possible that we'll go in there and not be able to get out?" Belinda, annoyed by their attitude, thought, "They are so daring, interrupting when the young master is speaking." Gieslein remained silent for a moment, then continued, "Anyone who wants to retreat is free to do so, but remember this, if everything ends well, I promise to pay you 3 times the original wage." As soon as the whole group heard of the generous reward, they were excited. "Really? 3 times is worth trying." Belinda, hearing that, anxiously whispered in his ear, "Young master, what did you just say?" "The money we brought back last time was almost used up to prepare for this." He still didn't care and replied, "That's how we can raise the morale of the troops." He remembered the rune stones that were about to be mined and thought, "Anyway, if we are successful, everything will not only be compensated for but will also be more than enough." Gieslein turned to look at her. "Do you trust me?" Belinda had no choice but to sigh, "I have to trust you." Cower, who was also nearby, turned to Jillian and said, 3 times the wages, that's a promise that no one would dare to make unless they've lost their minds. How are you going to handle this? Our master is always so reckless." Gillian closed his eyes and replied in a low voice, "But he always has a plan in his head." He looked at the mixed group of mercenaries, then looked at the uniformed group of Cerberus soldiers. Finally, he shouted loudly, "Beast Forest Expedition Team, prepare to set off." Gieslein turned and led the way, then turned back slightly and said in a deep voice, "Let's go." Inside the forest, the trees nearly blocked out the sunlight. The thick tree trunks were gradually being chopped down by axes. Everyone was focused on clearing the way. Gieslein also personally chopped down trees. The large tree in front of him fell with a loud thud. He looked up at the sky and murmured, "Excellent, the light is finally starting to come through." Immediately after that, he turned to everyone who was busy and shouted, "Continue to clear the path in this direction. Cut the felled trees into pieces and load them onto the carts. Anyone who has free hands, dig around the base of the trees to easily pull out the roots." According to the Beast Forest Exploration Journal that he had collected from Duke Delphine in his past life, after saying that, he silently looked around. This Beast Forest is truly vast. One day, We will clear out all the monsters and exploit the resources of this forest. What I need right now is money. Therefore, based on the map, he would choose to go straight to the mine. Let's ignore everything else and open the fastest path to the runestone vein. Gieslein, without any hesitation, continued to chop down trees. The wealth that I gain from this expedition will be an important weapon to prevent any scheme surrounding per diem. Kaur, seeing how enthusiastic he was, thought to himself, oh, even the young master is personally doing work, huh? The mercenaries, seeing that, began to mock. What's this? Trying to show off the noble qualities of a nobleman by setting an example? What kind of dignity is that? All that is just for show. Just wait, he'll soon be exhausted and collapse. Belinda, hearing the two of them talk, angrily shouted, hey, stop talking nonsense and get to work. The two quickly left. Yes, yes. She looked at their backs unhappily. They really are. She went behind Gieslein and advised, young master, you've already spent money to hire people, so why are you still doing it yourself? When they see you doing it, that's why they dare to disrespect you. He was focused on chopping down trees, not caring about anything else. It's fine. The more people working, the faster the job will be completed. There's nothing good about staying here longer. Although she knew that was the case, Belinda still felt upset and pouted. If you say so, you talk as if you knew everything before coming here. Kaur and Jillian were busy carrying wood. Hearing that, he turned to tease. The young master has a girl who cares and worries about him. That's really enviable. Someone else, not only is he a dog for someone else, but he also has to walk into hell himself. Before he could finish speaking, Jillian poked him in the back with a piece of wood, causing him to nearly cough up blood. What was that? Kaur yelled, arguing with Jillian. You want to start a fight? He looked at them bickering and thought, everything is still going smoothly. He remembered what he had seen in the book from his previous life. Duke Delphine, who conquered the kingdom and founded a new dynasty, had launched a large-scale beast forest exploration campaign. The reason they chose to explore this place, I still can't clarify. However, I did obtain an exploration journal, recording the location of important resources and the ecology of the monsters. Thanks to that, I was somewhat prepared before coming here. But, at the area where the lanterns were being stored, there were two people standing guard. They didn't understand why he was doing this and silently judged him. What's the boss thinking? Bringing 100 lanterns like this? If he was planning to use them at night, then torches would clearly be cheaper and more convenient. Gieslein turned his head to look at everyone who was busy in the middle of the forest. The fact that nothing has happened is making me more worried. I only read what was written in the journal, but I've never witnessed what happened here. Thinking about this, he turned his head seriously and instructed everyone, all of you, absolutely do not let your guard down. We are going deeper into the forest. A beast forest filled with dangers was waiting ahead. In another corner, the mercenaries were still diligently chopping down trees. One of them looked at the sky and asked in confusion, has it gotten dark already? It seems a bit dark. The person next to him immediately smiled and replied, but it's said that the forest is very dangerous, but we haven't seen any monsters, not even an ant. The two of them were still talking. It must just be rumors. Maybe, even if Gordon does nothing, we can still say we got lucky. If all we have to do is open a path like this and get paid 3 times the wage, then, I'm a little sorry. On this side, the bald man raised his leg and kicked Gordon in the back. Hey, give me back the money. Gordon didn't care and suddenly realized something. He suddenly spoke. Hey, you guys. He was still holding a large tree and was wondering, clearly, we've cut down many trees on our way here, right? Those behind him, not understanding what he was trying to say, just vaguely replied, yes, we have. Only at this point did they realize. The trees completely blocked the path. Gordon stood in front of a huge tree and turned around, saying, but why can't I see a path? Hearing that, the others began to realize something. At this moment, Gieslein said in a deep voice, everyone, pay attention. Everyone immediately looked coldly in the same direction. The mercenaries turned around in fear. What is it? Why does the atmosphere suddenly feel like this? He suddenly looked towards Gordon and called, you. Listen. Hearing his voice, he flinched and looked over. He then said with a cold voice, if you stand there, you will die. He frowned, staring intently at that side, and said slowly come over here, 1 step at a time. Gordon immediately obeyed, turning around and replying, yes, I understand. But the wood on his shoulder accidentally bumped into a tree behind him. The ground started to shake and tremble violently. The mercenaries looked at him, gnashing their teeth. That idiot. Gordon looked behind him in horror. Behind him was a huge tree that looked extremely bizarre. What? Something's not right. My. Our employer sure gets scared easily, huh? See for yourself, there's nothing here. It only seems like there's no path because the scenery is similar. That idiot is just mistaken. The so-called Forest of Beasts has a grand name. But in reality, it's just a slightly dense forest. You, come this way too, or you will die. Why do you keep trying to create such a scary atmosphere? Do you think we don't know you're trying to intimidate us by doing this? They had no presence at all, and there was no way to predict how they would move. A being that you can only fall victim to if you're unaware. A direct